In 1883 Montana, Clara Whitlock, the scarred, invisible daughter of a dying ranch, expected nothing. But when feared cattle baron heir Rowan Mercer arrived to choose a bride, he shocked everyone by refusing her beautiful younger sister and demanding Clara instead. What seemed like rescue became something far darker. Marriage into an empire built on blood, stolen land, and 30 years of buried enemies. When a vengeful son returns to destroy the Mercer name through law and exposure, Clara faces an impossible choice: ignite a war that will slaughter innocents, or step into the fire herself and rewrite the rules of survival on the brutal frontier. If you want to see how a woman nobody wanted becomes the one who changes everything, stay until the end. Hit like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Clara Whitlock's hands were bleeding again. She'd wrapped them that morning, old strips of flour sackcloth, the kind her stepmother refused to waste on decent bandages. But the work didn't care about wrapping. The fence post didn't care. The wire didn't care. By noon, red had soaked through the cotton, and by the time the sun started its slow descent over the dying Montana grassland, she'd stopped checking. Her father wouldn't notice anyway. The Whitlock Ranch sat like a rotting tooth in the landscape. 200 acres that used to mean something back when her mother was alive. Back when cattle actually grazed the fields instead of being sold off one by one to cover debts that never seemed to shrink. The barn leaned east. The house leaned west. Everything in between just leaned toward collapse. Clara drove the post deeper into the hard ground, her shoulders burning. 22 years old and her body already felt 50. That's what happened when you were the eldest daughter nobody wanted. You became the thing that kept everyone else alive while they pretended you didn't exist. "Clara!" Her stepmother's voice cut across the field like a rusty blade. Clara didn't turn around. She knew what was coming. "Clara Whitlock, you stop that right now and get in here." She sank the post one more time, then straightened. Her back cracked. Everything hurt in a way that had become so familiar it almost didn't register anymore. Almost. She picked up the wire cutters, wiped the blood on her pants, and started the long walk back to the house. Margaret Whitlock stood on the porch with her arms crossed, her face pinched into that permanent expression of disappointment she wore whenever Clara came into view. Behind her, visible through the open door, Clara could see her half-sister Rosalie sitting at the kitchen table. Rosalie's hands were clean. Rosalie's dress was clean. Rosalie's entire existence was clean in a way that Clara had stopped aspiring to years ago. "What?" Clara said when she reached the steps. "Don't you what me?" Margaret's eyes dropped to Clara's bleeding hands, then away, as if the sight disgusted her. "We have company coming." "So? So you will make yourself presentable." Margaret's voice dropped lower, meaner. "And you will stay out of sight unless specifically called for. Do you understand?" Clara understood plenty. She understood that company meant someone Margaret wanted to impress. She understood that her presence, scarred, dirty, useful only for labor, would ruin whatever illusion of gentility her stepmother was trying to create. She understood that Rosalie would be displayed like a prize horse, while Clara would be hidden like a shameful secret. She'd understood all of this since she was 12 years old. "Fine," Clara said, "and change that shirt. You look like you've been dragged behind a wagon." Clara walked past her into the house without responding. In the narrow room she shared with her younger half-brother, Rosalie had gotten her own room 2 years ago. She stripped off the ruined shirt and found the only other one she owned that wasn't actively falling apart. It was still stained. Everything she owned was stained. You couldn't scrub out years of blood, dirt, and work, no matter how hard you tried. She splashed water on her face from the basin, tied her hair back with a piece of twine, and looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the dresser. Her mother's eyes looked back at her. That's what people used to say, back when people still mentioned her mother. "You have Sarah's eyes." Green-gray like winter grass, set in a face that had been pretty once, maybe, before the sun and the work had carved it down to something harder. Her hands were a ruin of scars, barbed wire, rough wood, a horse bite that had gotten infected when she was 16 and nearly killed her because Margaret said the doctor was too expensive. She was not the daughter anyone showed off. She was the daughter who kept the ranch from falling into the ground while everyone else pretended it was fine. Downstairs, she could hear Margaret ordering Rosalie to change her dress, could hear her father's heavy footsteps crossing the floor, could hear the frantic energy of a house preparing to lie about what it really was. Clara sat on the edge of her bed and waited. The rider came just before sunset. Clara watched from the kitchen window as the horse approached, a massive black gelding that moved like it had never known a hard day in its life. The man on its back sat straight, easy, like someone who'd grown up in a saddle and never learned to be uncomfortable. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the clothes. Expensive. The kind of leather and wool that came from somewhere far away. Somewhere that wasn't slowly dying of drought and debt. Margaret appeared at Clara's elbow, breathing fast with barely contained excitement. That's him. Who? Rowan Mercer. Margaret said the name like it meant something profound. August Mercer's son. Clara knew the Mercer name. Everyone in Montana Territory knew the Mercer name. August Mercer owned half the rangeland between here and the Wyoming border. Thousands of acres, thousands of cattle, enough money and power to make or break entire towns. He was the kind of man people spoke about in careful voices, the kind who didn't need to raise his fist to make people afraid. "What's he doing here?" Clara asked. Margaret shot her a look that could have stripped paint. "He's looking for a wife." The pieces clicked into place. The frantic cleaning, Rosalie's new dress, Margaret's desperation that had been vibrating through the house for days. They were selling Rosalie to save the ranch. Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. Not surprise, not even disappointment. Just the dull recognition of how things worked when you had nothing left to bargain with except your children. "Get upstairs," Margaret hissed. "Now." "You just told me to I don't care what I told you. Get out of sight." Clara climbed the stairs as her father opened the front door. From the landing, she could hear the deep voice of the man entering their house, could hear her father's laugh, too loud, too eager, the laugh of someone who knew he was drowning and had just seen a rope. She should have gone to her room, should have hidden like she was told. Instead, she sat on the top step where the shadows pooled thick and watched through the railing slats. Rowan Mercer stood in their front room like he didn't quite fit, not because he was too large, though he was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested real work, not decorative muscle, but because everything about him was too solid for this house of collapsing dreams. He was maybe 30, with dark hair and a face that didn't give much away. His eyes moved across the room, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the threadbare rug, the careful arrangement of their least broken furniture. He saw everything. "Mr. Whitlock." His voice was low, even. "Thank you for receiving me." Of course, of course." Her father, Thomas Whitlock, drunk by noon most days, was trying very hard to sound sober. "This is my wife, Margaret, and my daughter Rosalie." Rosalie stepped forward right on cue. 19 years old and pretty in that delicate way that men were supposed to want, pale skin, soft hands, a smile that suggested she'd never touched anything harsher than a rose petal. She curtsied slightly, her new dress rustling. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice gentle and carefully modulated. "It's an honor." Rowan nodded to her but didn't speak. His attention had already moved past Rosalie, past Margaret and Thomas, to something else in the room. Clara realized with a cold jolt that he was looking at the wall behind them, at the line of pegs where they hung their work coats. Her coat hung there, worn leather, patched at the elbows, still carrying the mud from this morning's work. "You have another daughter," Rowan said. It wasn't a question. The room went silent in a way that made Clara's skin prickle. Thomas glanced at Margaret, who'd gone rigid. "That is, Clara, my eldest, she's not she's indisposed," Margaret cut in smoothly. "Unwell. Not fit for company." Rowan's eyes moved to the stairs. Clara knew the exact moment he saw her. His gaze locked on hers through the railing slats, and she saw something shift in his expression, not surprise exactly, something closer to recognition. She should have looked away, should have retreated into the shadows like the forgotten daughter she was supposed to be. She didn't. "I'd like to meet her," Rowan said, still looking at Clara. Margaret made a sound like a small animal being strangled. "Mr. Mercer, I assure you, Rosalie is much better suited." "I'd like to meet her," he repeated. Quieter this time, but with a weight that made it clear this wasn't a request anyone could refuse. Clara stood up. She walked down those stairs with her scarred hands and her stained shirt in her mother's eyes, and when she reached the bottom, she looked Rowan Mercer directly in the face. "Clara Whitlock," she said. No curtsy, no gentle voice, just her name. Rowan Mercer. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was strong, but he didn't crush her fingers the way some men did when they wanted to prove something. His palm was calloused. Whatever else he wasn't afraid of work. Margaret was making frantic gestures behind Rowan's back, her face a mask of fury and panic. Rosalie looked like she was about to cry. Thomas had gone pale. Rowan studied Clara the way someone might study a horse they were thinking of buying. Not cruel, just thorough. His eyes moved over her hands, her face, the way she stood like she was ready for a fight. "How old are you?" he asked. 22. "You run this ranch." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Someone has to." "Your father, us. My father drinks." She said it flat, matter of fact. Behind her, Thomas made a choked sound. "My stepmother manages the house. Rosalie looks pretty. I do everything else." Margaret's voice was shrill. "Clara, that is completely inappropriate." "It's true," Clara said, not breaking eye contact with Rowan. "Isn't that why you're here? To see what's true?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across Rowan's face. "That's exactly why I'm here." He turned to Thomas. "I'll take her." The room exploded. Margaret. "You can't possibly—" Thomas. "Now wait just a—" Rosalie. "But I thought—" Rowan's voice cut through it all. "I need a wife who can survive, who can work, who won't break the first time things get hard." He looked at Clara again. "You're angry. You're tired. You've been carrying weight that should have been shared, and nobody's even thanked you for it. Am I wrong?" Clara's throat felt tight. "No. I'm offering you a way out." His tone was completely even, like he was discussing a business transaction, which Clara supposed he was. "My father is dying. When he's gone, I inherit the ranch and everything that comes with it. I need a partner who can handle what that means. Not a decoration. A partner." "What does it mean?" Clara asked. "Nothing easy." He paused. "Nothing safe. And definitely nothing romantic. This isn't a love story. It's survival." Clara heard Margaret's gasp, heard her father trying to sputter out some kind of response, heard Rosalie's small sob. She didn't care about any of it. She looked at her bleeding hands, at the house that had worked her to the bone without ever calling her family, at the future she could see stretching ahead, more fence posts, more blood, more invisible labor until she either died or disappeared entirely. "When?" she asked. 3 days. Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Marriage contract, standard terms. You'll want to read it." He handed it to her, not to her father. That alone told Clara more than the words did. Margaret found her voice again. "Thomas, you cannot allow this." "Why not?" Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Isn't this what you wanted? Someone with money to save the ranch?" She looked at her stepmother with all the years of swallowed rage rising up in her throat. "Or did you only want it if Rosalie got the glory?" Margaret's face went white, then red. Thomas stepped forward, trying to salvage something. "Clara, you're upset. You don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly." Clara folded the contract without reading it and met her father's eyes. "I understand I've been keeping this place alive for 10 years while you drank yourself stupid and married a woman who treats me like an animal. I understand you were ready to sell Rosalie to fix your mistakes. So yes, I'll go." She turned to Rowan. 3 days? 3 days. Then I'll see you in 3 days. She walked past all of them, up the stairs, and into her room. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. From downstairs she could hear the muffled argument. Margaret's shrill accusations, Thomas's weak protests, Rowan's low, calm voice cutting through it all. Clara looked around the tiny room that had been her cage for so long. At the narrow bed, the single dresser, the cracked mirror, the window that looked out over the fields she'd bled into without anyone noticing. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know if what she'd just agreed to was escape or just a different kind of prison. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never set another fence post on the Whitlock Ranch. And that was enough. The next 3 days passed in a strange, silent fury. Margaret didn't speak to her. Rosalie cried in her room and refused to come out. Thomas tried once, just once, to talk to Clara about reconsidering, and she'd looked at him with such flat contempt that he'd backed out of the room without finishing his sentence. Clara packed everything she owned into a single canvas bag. It didn't take long. 2 shirts, 1 pair of pants, the work coat, a photograph of her mother, creased and faded, that she kept hidden under her mattress. That was it. 22 years of life fit into something she could carry with one hand. On the morning of the 3rd day, she woke before dawn out of habit. She dressed, braided her hair, and walked down to the barn one last time. The horses nickered softly as she passed their stalls. She'd raised most of them from foals. They knew her hands, her voice, the particular way she moved through the darkness. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the familiar smell of hay and leather and animal warmth. This was the only place on the ranch that had ever felt like hers. She walked back to the house as the sun broke over the horizon. Margaret was in the kitchen, banging pots around with unnecessary violence. Clara poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove and sat at the table. Margaret whirled on her. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Clara took a sip. The coffee was bitter and slightly burnt. "I'm not proud. I'm leaving. You've destroyed this family. I've kept this family alive." Clara set the cup down. "There's a difference. That man doesn't want you. He wants a mule, a workhorse, something he can use." "Yes," Clara said. "I know." Margaret's mouth opened and closed. She'd clearly expected an argument, some kind of protest. When none came, she looked almost disappointed. "You'll regret this," Margaret said finally. "When you're living in that house, surrounded by those people, when you realize you'll never be—" "Be what?" Clara interrupted. "Pretty enough? Soft enough? Enough like Rosalie?" She stood up. "I've spent my whole life not being enough for you. At least now I'll be not enough somewhere else." She left the kitchen and went upstairs to wait. Rowan arrived exactly at noon. He rode the same black horse, and behind him was a wagon driven by an older man Clara didn't recognize. The wagon was empty except for 2 wooden crates strapped down in the bed. Clara walked out before anyone could stop her, her bag slung over her shoulder. Thomas was suddenly on the porch. "Clara, wait." She turned. Her father stood there in his old work clothes, looking smaller than she remembered. Older, defeated in a way that might have made her sad once, before she'd learned that pity was just another kind of weight she couldn't afford to carry. "I don't—" He struggled with the words. "I didn't mean for things to be—" "I know," Clara said. She was surprised to find she meant it. He hadn't meant for anything. He just let it all happen while he was too drunk or too weak or too broken to stop it. That might have been worse than cruelty. "Goodbye, Daddy," she said. She hadn't called him that since she was 12. Something crumpled in his face. He lifted one hand like he might reach for her, then let it drop. Clara walked to where Rowan waited on his horse. He looked down at her. "You ready?" "Yes." He glanced at her single bag. "That's everything?" "That's everything." He nodded once, then swung down from the saddle. For a second, Clara thought he was going to help her onto the horse, but instead he tied his gelding to the back of the wagon and gestured to the driver's seat. "You'll ride with Sam," he said. "Horse's name is Goliath. Don't let him eat while we're moving. He'll try." Clara climbed up beside the older man, who grinned at her with half his teeth missing. "Sam Porter," he said. "Pleasure." "Clara." "I know who you are." Sam clicked to the horse. "Been hearing about you for 3 days. Whole territory's been talking." Clara glanced back at the house. Margaret stood in the doorway, rigid with fury. Rosalie was at the upstairs window, her face pressed against the glass. Thomas remained on the porch, one hand raised in a gesture that might have been farewell or surrender. The wagon started rolling. Clara didn't look back again. They rode for hours. The landscape changed slowly. The dry, struggling grassland of the Whitlock property giving way to something greener, more alive. They passed other ranches, other homesteads, all of them small compared to what Clara knew the Mercer holdings to be. Sam filled the silence with easy conversation, stories about horses, about the territory, about absolutely nothing important. Clara got the sense he was trying to make her comfortable, which was strange. Nobody had tried to make her comfortable in years. "You nervous?" he asked finally. "Should I be?" Sam considered this. August Mercer's a hard man, but Rowan— He glanced over his shoulder to where Rowan rode behind them. Rowan's different, harder in some ways, fairer in others. He says he's going to do something. He does it. That's supposed to reassure me? Sam laughed. Girl, I gave up trying to reassure people about the Mercers a long time ago. Just telling you what's true. The sun was setting when they finally crested a hill, and Clara saw it. The Mercer Ranch spread across the valley like its own country. The main house was massive, 2 stories of dark wood and stone, surrounded by outbuildings that seemed to go on forever. Barns, stables, bunkhouses, storage sheds, a smithy with smoke still rising from its chimney. Hundreds of cattle dotted the fields, and Clara could see at least a dozen men working various tasks, even at this late hour. This wasn't a ranch. This was an empire. Hell, Clara said softly. Yeah, Sam agreed. Takes some getting used to. They rolled down into the valley as darkness settled in. As they approached the main house, Clara saw a figure standing on the wide front porch, a man with white hair and a cane, watching their arrival with the intensity of a hawk tracking prey. That's August, Sam murmured. Best to let Rowan handle the introductions. The wagon stopped. Rowan appeared at Clara's side before she could climb down, offering his hand. She took it and stepped to the ground, her legs stiff from the long ride. August Mercer studied her the way his son had, but there was something different in his gaze, something darker, more calculating. So, he said. His voice was rough, like he'd spent too many years shouting orders. You're the one who's supposed to keep this place running when I'm dead. Clara felt everyone waiting for her response. Rowan stood slightly behind her, tense. Sam had gone quiet. The workers who'd been nearby had stopped to watch. She looked August Mercer in the eye. If I survive you, she said. For a long, terrible moment, August just stared at her. Then he laughed, a harsh barking sound that turned into a cough that shook his whole frame. When he recovered, there were tears in his eyes. She'll do, he said to Rowan. Bring her inside. He turned and walked into the house, leaning heavily on his cane. Rowan exhaled slowly. That went better than expected. What would worse have looked like? Clara asked. You don't want to know. He picked up her bag. Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying. Clara followed him into the house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, heavy furniture, everything built to last forever. But there was something cold about it too, something that felt more like a fortress than a home. Rowan led her up a wide staircase to the second floor and down a long hallway. He stopped at a door near the end. This is your room, he said, pushing it open. The space beyond was larger than the entire room she'd shared with her brother back at the Whitlock Ranch. A real bed with a thick mattress, a wardrobe, a writing desk, a window that looked out over the valley. Clara stood in the doorway, unable to move. There's a bathroom down the hall, Rowan continued. Hot water. You'll share it with me. There are 2 other bathrooms in the house, but this floor is just us and August. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at 7. Between those times, August will want to talk to you. A lot. He doesn't have much time left, and he's determined to... He paused, searching for words. To prepare you. For what? Clara asked. Everything. Rowan set her bag on the bed. The wedding's in 2 days. August wanted it sooner, but the judge couldn't get here any faster. What happens after? After you become my wife, and then you'll find out exactly what you've agreed to. He moved to the door. Get some sleep. You'll need it. He closed the door behind him. Clara stood alone in the room that was somehow hers now, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. She walked to the window and looked out at the darkening valley, at the empire spread below like a promise or a threat. Somewhere in the house she could hear voices. August's rough bark, Rowan's lower response, other men she didn't know. She thought about her father, drunk and useless, about Margaret's cruelty, about Rosalie's tears, about the ranch that had nearly killed her. She thought about the man who had looked at her scarred hands and chosen her anyway, and she thought about what he'd said. This isn't a love story. It's survival. Clara pressed her palm against the cold glass. Good, she whispered to her reflection. I'm good at surviving. Behind her, the door opened without warning. August Mercer stood in the hallway, backlit by the lamplight. Stop staring at the dark, he said. Come downstairs. We need to talk. Now? I'm dying, girl. Later isn't a luxury I have. He turned away. 5 minutes. Kitchen. Clara took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and followed him into the empire she'd just agreed to inherit. Whatever came next, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else. Head up, eyes open, ready to bleed if that's what survival required. It was the only way she knew how to live. The kitchen was bigger than the entire first floor of the Whitlock house. Clara stood in the doorway, taking it in. The massive iron stove that could probably cook for 50 men, the long wooden table scarred with decades of use, the shelves lined with more supplies than her family had seen in years. A woman in her 50s was scrubbing a pot at the sink, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. August sat at the head of the table with a whiskey bottle in front of him. He poured 2 glasses without asking if Clara wanted one. "Sit," he said. Clara sat. The woman at the sink glanced over her shoulder, gave Clara a quick nod, then went back to her work. August pushed one of the glasses across the table. "Drink," he said. I don't care what you do or don't do. Tonight, you drink." He picked up his own glass. "Because tonight, we talk about things that are easier with whiskey in your blood." Clara lifted the glass and took a sip. It burned going down, harsh and unforgiving. She didn't cough. August watched her with those hawk eyes. "You know why Rowan chose you? He said he needed someone who could survive." "That's part of it." August leaned back in his chair. The movement seemed to cost him something. A flash of pain crossed his face before he controlled it. "The other part is I told him to choose someone like you." "Like me?" Angry, scarred, used to being treated like dirt. August took a long drink. Someone who knows what it means to be the thing nobody wants but everyone needs. Clara's fingers tightened on the glass. "Why?" "Because this empire," August gestured vaguely at the walls, the house, everything beyond it, "was built by someone like you. By me, 30 years ago, when I had nothing but rage in 2 hands and the willingness to do whatever it took to survive." He poured himself another drink, his hand trembling slightly. "Cancer," Rowan had said. August Mercer was dying, and everyone knew it. "I came to Montana Territory with $50 and a rifle," August continued. "That's it. No land, no family, no connections. Just the understanding that men who wait for things to be given to them die poor and forgotten." "So you took it," Clara said. "So I took it." August's smile was sharp. "Every acre, every cow, every drop of water that flows through this valley. I took it from men who thought they deserved it more than me. Men who thought they were entitled to it because their fathers had been here first, or because they had more money, or because they thought being decent made them strong." The woman at the sink had stopped scrubbing. She was listening now, though she pretended not to be. "I broke those men," August said. "Financially, politically, sometimes literally. I drove them off their land. I bought up their debts. I made sure everyone in this territory knew that crossing August Mercer meant losing everything." He finished his second drink and poured a third. The bottle was half empty already. "And now I'm dying," he said, his voice flat. "And every man I ever destroyed is waiting for me to be in the ground so they can come for my son." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "That's why you wanted me. That's why I wanted someone who understands that survival isn't pretty. Someone who won't flinch when the ugly truth comes out." August leaned forward. "Because it will come out. There are things buried in this ranch's history that would destroy us if they became public. Land deals that weren't legal, debts that were collected with violence, families that were ruined because they stood in my way." The whiskey burned in Clara's throat, but she forced it down. "And you want me to what? Help cover it up?" "I want you to be ready when it hits." August's eyes were hard. "Because when I'm dead, they won't come for Rowan with guns. They'll come with lawyers, with newspapers, with proof of every crime I committed to build this place. And if you're not strong enough to stand in that storm, everything falls." Clara thought about the Whitlock Ranch, collapsing slowly under the weight of debt and weakness, and men who couldn't face what they'd become. She thought about her father's trembling hands and Margaret's desperate attempts to save face and Rosalie's useless tears. "I won't let it fall," she heard herself say. August smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "That's what I thought." He stood up, wincing as his body protested. "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, you meet me in the office. I'm going to teach you how to run this empire, how to read the books, manage the men, handle the territory politics. You've got 2 days before the wedding and maybe 2 months before I'm dead. That's your education. And if I can't learn it all, then you'll learn it while drowning. August picked up his cane. But you won't drown. I can see it in you. Same thing I saw in my mirror 30 years ago. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. Rowan doesn't know everything I did to build this place. He knows some of it, enough to make him hate me a little, but not all of it. When I die, there's a locked cabinet in my office. Only I have the key. He pulled a small iron key from his pocket and set it on the table. After I'm gone, you'll decide what he needs to know and when, not before. Understood? Clara stared at the key. Why me and not him? Because he's my son, and he wants to believe I'm better than I am. But you... August's smile turned almost gentle. You already know I'm a bastard. Makes you more trustworthy. He left. Clara sat alone in the massive kitchen with the half-empty whiskey bottle and the small iron key. The woman at the sink finally turned around. Name's Beth, she said. I run this kitchen and most everything else that happens in this house. Been here since before Rowan was born. Clara, I know. Beth dried her hands on her apron. That conversation you just had? That's more than August has said to anyone except Rowan in 5 years. He likes you. That was him liking me? That was him trusting you. Beth started putting away the clean pots. August doesn't trust easy, doesn't trust soft. He trusts hard and he trusts mean, because that's what he understands. Clara picked up the key. It was small, dark with age. Did you hear what he said? About the cabinet? I heard. Beth didn't look at her. I also know what's in it. Documents, letters, proof of things that would destroy this family if they got out. You've seen them? Didn't need to. I was here when half of it happened. Beth's hands stilled on the shelf. August Mercer is dying, and he knows it, and he's trying to make sure the Empire survives him. That key. That's him trying to protect Rowan from the truth until Rowan's strong enough to handle it. Or until I decide he can handle it. That's right. Beth turned to face her. You're going to have to make choices that will hurt people you care about. Choices between being honest and being kind. Between protecting the truth and protecting the ranch. If you're not ready for that... I'm ready, Clara said. Beth studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. Now, get some sleep. 6 o'clock comes early, and August doesn't tolerate lateness. Clara stood, pocketing the key. As she reached the door, Beth spoke again. Clara, one more thing. Yes? Rowan's a good man, better than his father. Don't let August turn you into something that breaks him. Clara didn't have an answer to that. She climbed the stairs to her room, the key heavy in her pocket, and tried to sleep in a bed that was too soft, in a house that was too big, on the edge of an empire built on secrets and blood. She didn't sleep well. At exactly 6 o'clock the next morning, Clara knocked on the office door at the end of the first-floor hallway. Come. August sat behind a massive oak desk covered in papers, ledgers, and maps. The early light coming through the window made him look even older than he was. Skin gray, eyes sunken, the cancer eating him from the inside visible in every line of his face. Sit, he said, pointing to the chair across from him. Today, you learn numbers. For the next 6 hours, August walked Clara through the ranch's finances with the methodical precision of a general planning a war. The Mercer Ranch wasn't just big, it was complicated. Multiple herds in different grazing areas, contracts with buyers in 3 territories, workers on salary, workers on commission, workers who were paid in land rights, water agreements with neighboring ranches, loans given, loans owed, interest calculated to the penny. Clara's head spun trying to keep track of it all. Focus, August snapped when her attention wavered. This column here, see it? Those are payouts to men who aren't on our official payroll. Why? Because they do work I don't want documented. Intimidation, enforcement, making sure certain people leave the territory before they cause problems. Clara felt sick. That's survival, August's voice was hard. You think empires are built with handshakes and fairness? They're built with men who are willing to do ugly work for good money. Every landowner in Montana has a list like this. I'm just honest enough to write it down. Rowan know about this? Rowan knows we occasionally have to handle problems. He doesn't know the details. August closed the ledger. And he won't. Not until he has to. The door opened without knocking. Rowan entered carrying a stack of papers, saw Clara, and stopped. "Didn't know you were starting this early," he said to his father. "She's got 2 months to learn what took me 30 years to build. Early is all we have." August gestured at the papers. "What's that?" "Water rights dispute. The Morrison Ranch is claiming we diverted their creek." "Did we?" 3 years ago. You had Jensen dam it upstream," August grunted. "Morrison was late on a loan payment. I was encouraging him to reconsider his priorities. He's paid now, and he's threatening legal action. Let him threaten." August coughed, a wet rattling sound that shook his whole frame. When he recovered, there was blood on his handkerchief. "We'll settle before it gets to court. Usual terms." Rowan's jaw tightened. The usual terms are extortion. The usual terms are business. They're wrong. Father and son stared at each other across the desk. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Clara spoke before she could stop herself. "What if we just gave the water back?" Both men turned to look at her. "Gave it back," August repeated slowly. "The loan's paid. The point was made. Keeping the water now just creates an enemy." Clara kept her voice level. "We don't need another enemy." August's eyes narrowed. "You've been here one day and you're already telling me how to run my ranch? You said you were teaching me. I'm learning." Clara met his gaze. "You also said people were waiting for you to die so they could destroy this place. Maybe it would be harder for them if we stopped giving them reasons to want revenge." Rowan was staring at her now too, but his expression was different, something almost like surprise. August leaned back in his chair. His face was unreadable. Then, slowly, he started to laugh. It turned into another coughing fit, but when he recovered, he was still smiling. "Rowan," he said, not looking away from Clara, "give Morrison his water back." "What?" "You heard me. Give him his creek, full rights, no conditions." August wiped his mouth. "And send him a letter apologizing for the delay." Rowan looked like he'd been hit in the head with a board. "You never apologize." "I'm dying. I can do whatever the hell I want." August turned his attention back to the ledgers. "Now get out, both of you. I'm tired." Rowan grabbed Clara's arm as she stood and pulled her out of the office. He didn't speak until they were in the hallway with the door closed behind them. "What just happened?" he asked. "I have no idea." He never backs down, never apologizes, never gives anything back. Rowan was still gripping her arm. "How did you—" "I just said what made sense. To you, not to him." Rowan released her arm and ran his hand through his hair. "He's testing you." "I know." "And you're passing." He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "I thought, when I chose you, I thought you'd be strong enough to survive what was coming. I didn't think you'd start changing things on your first day." "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet." Rowan glanced back at the office door. "But it's interesting." He walked away, leaving Clara alone in the hallway with the strange feeling that something important had just shifted, though she couldn't name what. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions and information. Beth showed her how the household ran, where food was stored, how laundry was managed, which workers lived in the bunkhouses, and which had families in the smaller cabins scattered across the property. Sam took her on a tour of the barns and explained the cattle rotation system. A man named Garrett, who seemed to be August's second in command, walked her through the grazing schedules and breeding records. Everyone watched her with the same careful expression, waiting to see what kind of woman Rowan Mercer had brought home. Clara tried to remember names and faces and failed. There were too many people, too many moving pieces, too much to learn, and not enough time to learn it. By dinner time, her head was pounding. The dining room was formal in a way that made Clara uncomfortable. A long mahogany table, proper place settings, candles, even though there was no one to impress. August sat at the head. Rowan sat to his right. Clara was placed to his left. Beth served roast beef and potatoes, while a younger girl, maybe 16, brought bread and poured water. Neither of them spoke. August ate in silence, his hands trembling slightly as he cut his meat. The cancer was worse at night, Clara realized. During the day, he could push through with sheer stubbornness, but by evening, the pain showed through every movement. "The wedding's tomorrow," August said finally. Judge Whitmore is writing in at noon. Ceremony will be quick. No guests except ranch hands. Clara set down her fork. My family weren't invited. August's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. This isn't that kind of wedding. Clara thought about Rosalie crying in her room, about Thomas standing on the porch, about Margaret's fury. She felt a strange twist of something that might have been guilt, but also might have been relief. Afterward, August continued, you'll move into Rowan's room. That's how this works. You're husband and wife, you share a bed. Rowan's knife scraped it against his plate. We can discuss that privately. Nothing to discuss. People need to see this as a real marriage, not some business arrangement. August pointed his fork at Clara. You understand? Clara looked at Rowan. He was staring at his plate, jaw tight, clearly uncomfortable. I understand, she said. The meal continued in silence. That night, Clara lay awake in her temporary room and thought about everything that was about to change. Tomorrow she'd marry a man she barely knew. Tomorrow she'd legally tie herself to an empire built on violence and secrets. Tomorrow she'd become Clara Mercer, and the invisible daughter from the dying ranch would disappear completely. She tried to feel something about it, fear maybe, or regret. Mostly she just felt tired. The wedding happened exactly as August said it would, quick and functional, with no pretense of romance. Judge Whitmore was a gray-haired man in his 60s who clearly knew August well. He sat up in the front parlor with a Bible he didn't bother opening and a piece of paper listing the legal requirements. Clara wore the same clean shirt she'd arrived in. No one had mentioned a dress. Rowan wore a dark jacket that looked uncomfortable on him. He stood beside her in front of the judge and repeated the words he was told to say without inflection or emotion. When it came time for Clara to speak, her voice came out steady. I do. Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. The judge signed the paper, handed it to August, and left without congratulating them. August gave the marriage certificate to Rowan. It's done. Now act like it. That was the entire ceremony. Beth had prepared a meal that was slightly fancier than normal, chicken instead of beef, real butter on the bread. But it wasn't celebratory. It was just dinner with legal paperwork attached. Afterward, Clara packed her single bag and carried it down the hall to Rowan's room. He was already there, standing by the window with his arms crossed. You can have the bed, he said without turning around. I'll sleep in the chair. Clara set her bag down. That's stupid. It's respectful. It's stupid, and everyone will know you're doing it. She sat on the edge of the bed and started unlacing her boots. We're adults. We can share a bed without making it complicated. Rowan finally turned to look at her. You're really not bothered by any of this? Should I be? Most women would be. I'm not most women. Clara pulled off her boots and stood up. You chose me because I'm practical, so be practical. The bed's big enough for both of us. We'll sleep on opposite sides. In the morning, we'll get up and keep doing what needs to be done. Rowan studied her for a long moment. You're the strangest person I've ever met. You're the one who married me. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. Fair point. They slept on opposite sides of the bed like strangers, and if Clara lay awake listening to his breathing in the darkness, she didn't acknowledge it, even to herself. The next 6 weeks passed in a rhythm that was equal parts exhausting and illuminating. Every morning at 6, Clara met with August in the office. He walked her through every aspect of running the ranch: contracts, negotiations, personnel management, crisis response. He was a brutal teacher, mocking her when she made mistakes and demanding she try again until she got it right. But slowly, Clara began to understand the machinery of the empire, how money flowed, how power worked, how to read men's intentions in their words and their silence. August was dying faster than anyone wanted to admit. Some days he couldn't get out of bed. Other days he pushed through on pure rage, teaching Clara with a desperation that suggested he knew he was running out of time. When I'm gone, he told her one morning, there's going to be a gap. Rowan knows the land and the cattle, but he doesn't know the politics. The territorial governor owes me favors. Those need to be collected carefully. The bank in Helena has 3 of our loans. Those need to be renegotiated before the terms change. The Morrison water situation bought us goodwill, but there are 6 other disputes that are about to boil over. I can't handle all of that alone, Clara said. You won't be alone. You'll have Rowan. August coughed into his handkerchief. More blood. But you'll need to guide him. Make him think he's making the decisions while you're actually steering the ship. Can you do that? Clara thought about all the years she'd kept the Whitlock Ranch running while her father took credit for her work. Yes, she said. I can do that. August smiled. It was the first time she'd seen him smile with something like approval. Good girl. At night, Clara lay beside Rowan in the darkness and listened to him breathe. They didn't talk much. He left early every morning to work the ranch and came back late covered in dirt and exhaustion. But sometimes, when he thought she was asleep, she felt him watching her. She never acknowledged it. The collapse came on a Wednesday. Clara was in the kitchen helping Beth prepare lunch when Sam burst through the door, his face white. Where's Rowan? North pasture, Beth said. Why? Get him, now. Sam looked at Clara. August just collapsed. He's not waking up. Clara ran. She found Rowan working on a broken fence with 3 other men. The moment he saw her face, he dropped his tools and started running before she even spoke. They reached August's office together. The old man was slumped in his chair, his skin gray, his breathing shallow and ragged. Beth was already there with water and cloths, but even Clara could see this was different from the other bad days. Get the doctor, Rowan said to Sam. He's 2 hours away. Get him now! Sam ran. Rowan knelt beside his father's chair. Dad, can you hear me? August's eyes fluttered open. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Took longer than I thought. Don't talk, just rest. Can't rest. August's hand moved weakly toward the desk drawer. The key. Clara has it. Clara's hand went to her pocket where she'd kept the small iron key for 6 weeks. Not now, Rowan said firmly. We'll deal with all that later. No. Later. August's breathing was getting worse. The cabinet. Everything she needs to know. Everything you need to know. Clara, promise me. Clara knelt on the other side of the chair. I promise. Don't let them destroy it. Don't let them... August's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. For a horrible moment, Clara thought he was dead. Then his chest rose again, shallow but steady. The doctor arrived 2 hours later and confirmed what everyone already knew. August had days at most, maybe a week if he was stubborn enough. There was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. They carried August upstairs to his bedroom. Beth and Clara took turns sitting with him while Rowan handled the ranch work that couldn't wait. Workers came by in 2s and 3s to pay their respects, many of them men who'd worked for August for decades. On the 5th night, August woke up lucid for the first time since the collapse. Clara was alone with him. Rowan had finally gone to sleep after 3 days of barely resting. Clara, August whispered. She leaned closer. I'm here. The cabinet. You need to open it now, before I'm gone, so I can explain. Rowan's not ready. You are. August's hand gripped hers with surprising strength. Please. Clara went downstairs to the office. The cabinet was in the corner, dark wood and locked tight. She used the iron key and the door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents, letters, and ledgers. Clara carried them all upstairs and sat beside August's bed while he talked. What he told her that night confirmed everything she'd suspected and worse. The Mercer Ranch had been built on calculated destruction. Land stolen through legal manipulation. Families driven off their property through intimidation and violence. Debts bought up and called in early to force foreclosures. Men paid to make problems disappear, sometimes literally. The name that kept appearing in the documents was Granger, Robert Granger, who'd owned a ranch twice the size of what August started with. Robert Granger, who August had systematically destroyed over the course of 10 years until the man died broken and his family scattered. His son, August whispered, Elias Granger. He'll come for revenge. He's been waiting 30 years. Where is he now? Don't know. But he'll come when I'm dead. He'll try to expose everything, destroy the ranch through legal means. August's breathing rattled. You need to be ready. You need to protect Rowan. How? However you have to. August closed his eyes. I did terrible things to build this, but I did them so my son would have something. Don't let him lose it because I was a bastard. Clara sat with the document spread around her, the weight of 30 years of crimes pressing down on her shoulders. Why me? She asked. Why trust me with this instead of Rowan? Because you're like me. You understand that sometimes surviving means doing things that aren't clean. August opened his eyes one last time. And because you love him, even if you haven't figured it out yet. Clara's throat tightened. I don't. Yes, you do. I see the way you watch him when he's not looking, the way you guide him without him knowing. You'd burn the world down to keep him safe. August smiled faintly. That's the kind of loyalty this empire needs. He died 3 hours later with Rowan holding one hand and Clara holding the other. The funeral was massive. Every rancher in the territory came to pay respects to the man who'd ruled Montana like a king for 3 decades. They stood in the cemetery and said careful words about August Mercer's legacy, while plotting, Clara was sure, how to take pieces of that legacy for themselves, now that the old lion was dead. Clara stood beside Rowan in a borrowed black dress and watched him try to hold himself together. His grief was private, locked down tight, but she could see it in the tension in his shoulders and the way his hand shook when he thought no one was looking. After the service, people came back to the ranch for food and whiskey. Clara moved through them like a ghost, overhearing fragments of conversation. Wonder if the sun can hold it together. Debts that were never documented. We might be able to... Heard there's questions about water rights dating back 20 years. They were circling already, looking for weakness. Clara found Rowan on the back porch as the sun was setting. He was staring out at the valley that was now entirely his, and he looked lost. I don't know if I can do this, he said without looking at her. Clara stood beside him. You can. He was terrible, cruel. He destroyed people. Rowan's voice cracked. But he was my father, and I know. They stood in silence while the last light faded from the sky. There are things I need to tell you, Clara said finally. About the ranch. About what your father did to build it. I don't want to hear it tonight. You're going to have to hear it soon. People are already planning how to take pieces of what he left you. Rowan turned to look at her. His face was exhausted, grief-worn, but his eyes were clear. Will you help me? Yes. Why? You didn't sign up for any of this. The marriage was just... It was survival, Clara interrupted, for both of us. But it's become something else. What? Clara thought about August's words, about the way she'd started to care whether Rowan slept enough, ate enough, carried too much weight alone, about the protective fury that rose in her throat when she heard people plotting against him. A partnership, she said, a real one. Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness. His palm was calloused, familiar now after weeks of sleeping in the same bed. Okay, he said. Then we'll do this together. Inside the house, Clara could hear the sounds of the wake winding down, voices growing louder as the whiskey took hold, someone laughing too hard at something that wasn't funny. Tomorrow she would tell Rowan everything. Tomorrow they would start figuring out how to protect an empire built on blood. But tonight she stood beside her husband in the darkness and let herself feel the weight of what was coming. The war August predicted was about to begin, and Clara had just promised to fight it. The attack came 2 weeks after they buried August. Clara woke to shouting and the sound of horses moving fast. Rowan was already out of bed, pulling on his pants in the darkness. She heard boots pounding down the hallway outside their room. Stay here, Rowan said, reaching for his rifle. Like hell. Clara was already dressing, her fingers clumsy on the buttons. They ran downstairs together. Sam was in the front hall with Garrett and 4 other men, all of them armed. Through the open door, Clara could see torches moving in the darkness near the north pasture. How many cattle? Rowan demanded. Can't tell yet, Garrett said, but it's bad. The fence is cut in 3 places and the herd scattered. Could be rustlers or someone sending a message, Clara finished. Sam looked at her sharply. What kind of message? The kind August said was coming. They rode out in the pre-dawn darkness, Clara on a mare Beth had saddled for her without being asked. The old woman had pressed a rifle into her hands with a single word, careful. The north pasture was chaos. Fence posts lay splintered on the ground, wire cut clean through with proper tools. Not torn, cut. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was planned. The cattle that remained were agitated, milling around in confusion, but Clara could see immediately that huge sections of the herd were simply gone. How many head were up here? She asked Sam. 300, give or take. Rowan was already off his horse, examining the cut wire in the growing light. This happened hours ago, maybe midnight. We should have heard something. We would have, Garrett said slowly, if someone hadn't spooked the horses in the south barn around the same time, had us running in the wrong direction. A diversion, Clara said. Her chest felt tight. They planned this. As the sun broke over the horizon, one of the younger hands, a kid named Tommy, who couldn't be more than 17, came galloping up from the western ridge. His face was white. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice shaking, "you need to see this." They followed him to the far fence line where it bordered the main road into town. Someone had taken a branding iron, not the Mercer brand, but something crude and temporary, and burned words into the wooden fence post. "The debt comes due." The silence that followed was absolute. Rowan stared at the words, his jaw working. "What debt?" Clara's hand went to her pocket where she'd been carrying one of August's documents, a letter from Robert Granger dated 30 years ago, begging August to reconsider the loan terms that would eventually destroy him. She'd been planning to show Rowan tonight, to sit him down and walk him through the full history carefully. She didn't have that luxury anymore. "We need to talk," she said. "Now, privately." They rode back to the house while Sam and Garrett organized the hands to start gathering what cattle remained and repairing the fences. In August's office, Rowan's office now, Clara spread the documents across the desk. "Your father gave me these before he died," she said. "He made me promise to protect you from the truth until you were ready. But I don't think we have that time anymore." Rowan picked up the first letter, his eyes scanning the desperate words, then the second, then the land deed that showed how August had legally seized the Granger property after calling in debts early and with interest rates that violated the original agreement. His face went from confused to shocked to something harder that Clara couldn't quite name. "He stole their ranch," Rowan said finally. "Yes." "And the Grangers, where are they now?" "Robert died 15 years ago, broken and poor." Clara pulled out another document. "But he had a son, Elias, who was 20 years old when his father lost everything. And Elias is doing this." It wasn't a question. "That's my guess. Your father said he'd been waiting for revenge. This," Clara gestured at the burned message they'd seen. "This feels like the opening move." Rowan sat down heavily in his father's chair. His hands were shaking. "What else? What other families did he destroy?" "6 that I've found documentation for, maybe more that he didn't record." "Jesus Christ. He did it to build this ranch, to give me what?" Rowan's voice was sharp. "An empire built on stealing from people? On ruining families? That's what I inherited?" Clara kept her voice level. "You inherited power, land, security. The how isn't pretty, but the fact remains that without what your father did, none of this exists. So I'm supposed to just accept it? Benefit from crimes?" "You're supposed to survive." Clara leaned forward. "Because if Elias Granger exposes all of this publicly, it won't just destroy your reputation. It'll destroy the ranch. The territorial governor will have to investigate. Land titles will be challenged. Every person your father wronged will come out of the woodwork with claims and lawsuits. The legal costs alone will bankrupt us. And that's before we factor in the workers who'll lose their jobs and the families who depend on this ranch for their livelihood." Rowan was staring at the documents like they might bite him. "So what do we do?" "I don't know yet." Clara gathered the papers back into their folder. "But sitting here feeling guilty won't help. We need to figure out what Elias wants and how to give it to him without losing everything." "Maybe we should lose everything." Rowan's voice was bitter. "Maybe that's what we deserve. You weren't the one who did this. But I'm the one who benefits from it. That makes me complicit." Clara wanted to shake him. "You benefit from it the same way I benefit from being able to eat dinner every night instead of going hungry the way I did at my father's house. Should I feel guilty about that too? Should I refuse to eat because the food exists because of your father's crimes?" "That's different." "It's not." Clara's patience was fraying. "Rowan, listen to me. You can hate what your father did. You can decide to run this ranch differently, but first you have to keep the ranch alive long enough to change it. And that means dealing with Elias Granger." A knock on the door interrupted them. Sam entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. We counted. 230 head missing. That's almost $80,000 in cattle. Rowan's face went pale. Christ. There's more. Sam hesitated. Some of the hands are talking about riding out to find whoever did this. Garrett's trying to keep them calm, but they're angry. They feel like someone hit us, and we're just taking it. Tell them, Rowan started, then stopped. Tell them what? Sam looked at Clara. She realized with a jolt that he was asking her permission. Tell them we're handling it, she said. Tell them Mr. Mercer is considering all options, and we'll have instructions by tonight. Nobody rides out for revenge without direct orders. Anyone who does is fired immediately. Sam nodded and left. Rowan was staring at her. Since when do you give orders to my men? Since your father spent 2 months teaching me how to run this ranch. Clara kept her voice even. You're overwhelmed right now. You're trying to process your father's crimes and figure out how you feel about inheriting them. That's fine. But while you're processing, someone needs to keep the machinery running. So you're just taking over? I'm doing what your father asked me to do. Help you. Clara softened her tone slightly. Rowan, I'm not trying to undermine you, but this... She gestured at the documents. This is exactly what August prepared me for. The ugly truth coming out, enemies attacking, you feeling torn between what's right and what's necessary. Rowan's hands were fists on the desk. I don't want to be like him. Then don't be. But don't be so different that you lose everything while trying to prove you're better than he was. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the valley. There's a middle path. We can fix what he broke without destroying ourselves in the process. But we have to be smart about it. How? First, we find Elias Granger. Clara turned back to face him. Second, we figure out what he really wants. Is it the cattle? Is it money? Or is it something else? Revenge. Maybe, but revenge takes different forms. Some people want blood. Some want justice. Some just want the world to know they were wronged. Clara paused. Your father would have responded to this with more violence, hunting Elias down, making an example of him, escalating until someone ended up dead. Is that what you want to do? Rowan was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, No. Then we do something August never would have done. Clara felt the idea forming even as she spoke it. We talked to him. Talked to the man who just stole $80,000 worth of our cattle. Yes. That's insane. It's unexpected, which means it might actually work. Clara's mind was racing now. Think about it. Elias has probably been planning this for years. He expects us to retaliate with violence to prove we're exactly like August. But what if we don't? What if we acknowledge what was done to his family and ask what it would take to make it right? Rowan looked at her like she'd suggested they set the house on fire. You want to negotiate with someone who's attacking us? I want to find out if there's a way to end this that doesn't result in a war that destroys both families. Clara crossed her arms. Because if we fight him the way your father would have, even if we win, we lose. The violence will expose everything anyway. Newspapers will cover it. The law will get involved. We'll be investigating and fighting legal battles and dealing with public opinion, and it'll tear the ranch apart piece by piece. And if we try to talk and he just laughs at us, then at least we tried something other than more violence. Clara met his eyes. And if he does laugh, if he refuses any reasonable settlement, then everyone will see we made the attempt. It changes the narrative from the Mercers are still monsters to the Mercers tried to make peace and were rejected. Rowan stood up and paced to the window. He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might refuse. Then, finally, he turned back. How do we find him? I might have an idea about that. Clara rode into town that afternoon with Sam as her escort. The territorial capital was small, barely deserving of the name. A main street with a bank, a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and a few other buildings pretending to be civilization. But it had a newspaper office, and newspapers always knew things that didn't make it into print. The editor was a man in his 40s named Morrison, no relation to the rancher whose water rights August had stolen, though Clara filed that coincidence away for later consideration. He looked up from his printing press when Clara entered, his eyes widening slightly. Mrs. Mercer, he said, condolences on your father-in-law's passing. Thank you. Clara got straight to the point. I'm looking for information on Elias Granger. Morrison's expression shifted. Not quite fear, but definitely caution. That's an interesting request. I'm sure it is. Can you help me or not? Depends what you want the information for. Clara made a decision to gamble on honesty. Someone stole 200 head of cattle from us last night, left a message about debts being due. I think it was Elias Granger, and I think he's getting revenge for what August Mercer did to his father 30 years ago. Morrison set down the type he'd been arranging. You're admitting that? I'm admitting I know the history. I'm also saying I want to find Elias and talk to him before this turns into something worse. Talk to him. Morrison's skepticism was obvious. August Mercer's daughter-in-law wants to talk to the son of the man August destroyed? August Mercer is dead, Clara said flatly. I'm not interested in continuing his wars. I'm interested in ending them. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a notebook from under the counter and flipped through it. Elias Granger has a place about 40 miles northeast of here. Small ranch, maybe 100 acres. He runs cattle, but not many. Morrison paused. Mostly he waits. For what? For August to die, I'd imagine. Morrison closed the notebook. He came to see me about 6 months ago. Wanted to know if I'd be interested in publishing documents that proved August Mercer stole land and destroyed families to build his empire. Clara's chest tightened. What did you say? I said I'd need to verify the documents first. Needed to be sure they were real before I'd print something that explosive. Morrison's eyes were sharp. He never came back with them, but I heard through other channels that he was still gathering evidence, building a case. Against the ranch. Against the Mercer name. Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Mercer, if what you're saying is true, if you really want to talk peace, you should know that Elias Granger isn't some common rustler. He's educated, spent time back east studying law. He's not interested in just stealing cattle or causing trouble. He wants to destroy your family's reputation so thoroughly that nobody in the territory will do business with you again. Clara felt cold. And the cattle theft? Opening shot. Proof he can hurt you, but the real attack is coming. Morrison tapped his notebook. And it'll be legal, public, and devastating. Unless we stop it first. Clara stood. Thank you for the information. Mrs. Mercer, Morrison called as she reached the door. If you do manage to talk to him, to actually make peace, I'd like to write that story. A Mercer and a Granger ending a 30-year feud? That's the kind of thing people need to see. Clara nodded and left. Back at the ranch, she found Rowan in the barn with Garrett, assessing the damage to their herd numbers. His face was drawn, exhausted. She pulled him aside and told him what Morrison had said. He's planning to destroy us through the courts and public opinion, Rowan said when she finished. That's smarter than violence. Much smarter. Which means we're dealing with someone who thinks several steps ahead. Clara lowered her voice. We need to get to him before he files whatever legal action he's planning. Once it's in the courts, we lose control of the narrative. So we ride to his ranch tomorrow? Tonight, Clara corrected, before he has time to plan his next move. Rowan looked at her like she was crazy. Tonight? That's a 6-hour ride in the dark. Then we better leave soon. They rode out just after sunset, Clara, Rowan, and Sam. Garrett had wanted to bring more men, but Clara refused. This wasn't a raid. If they showed up with an armed force, Elias would respond with violence. They needed to look like they were coming to talk, not fight. The ride was cold and uncomfortable, the horses picking their way carefully across terrain that was treacherous in the darkness. Clara's back ached, and her hands were numb on the reins, but she didn't complain. Beside her, Rowan rode in grim silence. What if he just shoots us? He asked at one point. Then your father was right about everything, and I was wrong about human nature. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. They found the Granger ranch around 2 a.m. It was exactly what Morrison had described. Small, barely more than a homestead. A single-story house with a barn that had seen better days. A small herd of maybe 30 cattle in a pen near the barn. And smoke rising from the chimney, which meant someone was awake. They dismounted at the edge of the property. Clara's legs nearly gave out from the long ride, but she forced herself to walk steady as they approached the house. A man stepped out onto the porch before they got within 50 feet. He was holding a rifle, not aimed but ready. In the moonlight, Clara could see he was younger than she'd expected, Maybe 35 with dark hair and the kind of lean build that came from hard work. That's close enough, he called out. Elias Granger? Clara's voice carried across the distance. Depends who's asking. Clara Mercer, this is my husband Rowan. She kept her hands visible, away from her own rifle. We're here to talk. Elias laughed, a harsh sound. You rode 6 hours in the dark to talk. That's either brave or stupid. Both, probably, Clara admitted. Can we come closer, or do you want to shout this whole conversation? Stay where you are. I can hear you fine. Elias adjusted his grip on the rifle. What do you want? I want to know what it would take to end this. And what? The war you're planning. The one your father couldn't win, and that you've been waiting 30 years to fight. The silence stretched out. Then Elias said, You know what August did? I know everything he did. I have the documents. The letters from your father, the land deeds, the loan records. Clara took a breath. I know August Mercer destroyed your family, and I know it was wrong. Wrong. Elias's voice was bitter. That's a convenient word. Does wrong bring my father back? Does it undo 30 years of poverty and shame? No, Clara said simply. Nothing can undo that. But continuing the cycle of revenge won't bring him back either. It'll just create more destruction. Maybe that's what I want. I don't think it is. Clara took a step forward. Sam's hand moved to his gun, but she waved him off. I think you want justice. Recognition that what happened to your family was a crime. Compensation for what was stolen. Am I wrong? Elias lowered his rifle slightly. Keep talking. August Mercer is dead. But the ranch he built still exists, and it employs 40 families who depend on it for their survival. If you destroy the ranch, you're not hurting August. He's already gone. You're hurting innocent people who had nothing to do with what happened to your father. Collateral damage, Elias said. The same thing my family was to August. Yes, exactly. Clara's voice strengthened. And you can either repeat his mistakes by treating innocent people as collateral damage, or you can be better than he was. You can accept restitution, land rights, financial settlement, public acknowledgement of what was done wrong. In exchange for what? Peace. Clara spread her hands. No more attacks. No legal battles that will drag both our families through years of court proceedings. No newspaper exposés that will hurt everyone involved. Just an end to the war. Rowan stepped forward. My father was a bastard. I'm not going to defend what he did. But Clara's right. Destroying the ranch won't change the past. It'll just create more victims. Elias stared at them across the darkness. Clara could feel her heart hammering, but she kept her face neutral, waiting. You have no idea what it's like, Elias said finally. His voice was raw. Watching your father beg for mercy. Watching him lose everything. Watching him drink himself to death because he couldn't face what he'd become. I was 20 years old and I swore I'd make August Mercer pay for every bit of it. And now he's dead, Clara said. So what's the point? The point is that people need to know what he was, what the Mercer name really represents. Then let them know. Clara's words hung in the air. Tell the story. Tell the whole truth about what August did to your family. We won't fight it. We won't deny it. We'll stand there and take the judgment because it's deserved. You'd do that? Elias sounded skeptical. If it means ending this without more violence, yes. Clara looked at Rowan, who nodded. But in exchange, we want the land rights that were stolen from your father returned to you. We want financial compensation. Not everything, because we can't replace 30 years, but enough to give you a fair start. And we want a formal agreement that this is settled. No more attacks. No more revenge. Elias was quiet for so long that Clara thought he would refuse. Then he said, How much compensation? How much do you want? Everything. The full value of what my father's ranch was worth when August took it. That's $60,000, Rowan said. We don't have that kind of cash. Then we don't have a deal. Elias raised his rifle again. Clara's mind raced. 60,000 would cripple them, especially with the cattle already stolen. But if they refused, the legal battle would cost even more, plus the damage to their reputation, plus the ongoing attacks. Half now, she heard herself say. 30,000 in cash. The other 30 in land rights. 300 acres on the eastern border, good grazing land with water access. That plus the return of your father's original property deed, and a public acknowledgement of what August did wrong. How do I know you'll honor this? How do we know you'll stop attacking us? Clara countered. At some point, someone has to trust. Elias studied them. Then, slowly, he set his rifle down against the porch railing. Come inside, he said. Let's write it down. They sat at Elias Granger's kitchen table for the next 2 hours, hammering out the details by lamplight. Sam stood guard outside while Clara and Rowan negotiated with a man who had every reason to hate them. It wasn't easy. Elias wanted more. They couldn't give more. They argued about land boundaries, payment schedules, the specific wording of the public acknowledgement. Several times, the discussion nearly broke down completely. But somehow, as dawn started to break through the windows, they had an agreement written out on paper. This doesn't make us friends, Elias said as they all signed it. I know, Clara replied, but it makes us something other than enemies. That's enough. They rode back to the ranch as the sun rose, exhausted and sore. Clara's mind was already racing ahead to the next problem. How to explain to Garrett and the other hands that they'd made a deal with the man who stole their cattle. How to come up with $30,000 in cash. How to tell the territorial governor that the Mercer Ranch was formally acknowledging crimes committed by its founder. Rowan reached over and took her hand as they rode. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever done, he said. Both, Clara said again. Definitely both. My father would have killed him. Your father built an empire on violence. Maybe we're building something different. Rowan squeezed her hand. Yeah, maybe we are. They reached the ranch to find Garrett waiting on the porch with half the hands gathered behind him. His face was thunderous. Where the hell have you been? He demanded. Making peace, Rowan said as he dismounted. He pulled the signed agreement from his jacket. With Elias Granger. The silence was immediate and absolute. You did what? Garrett's voice was dangerous. We negotiated a settlement. Rowan's voice was calm but firm. He gets his father's land back plus compensation. We get peace and an end to the attacks. It's done. You can't just Garrett sputtered. He stole our cattle. We don't negotiate with thieves. We do when negotiating prevents a war. Clara stepped forward. Elias Granger wasn't just stealing cattle. He was planning to destroy this ranch through legal action and public exposure of crimes August committed 30 years ago. We had a choice. Fight him in court for years and lose everything slowly, or settle now and move forward. August would never— August is dead, Rowan interrupted. His voice was hard. And I'm not August. This is my ranch now, and I'll run it the way I see fit. If anyone has a problem with that, you know where the road is. Garrett's face went red. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually leave. Then he looked at the other hands, saw that none of them were backing his anger, and nodded stiffly. Yes, sir, he said through gritted teeth. The hands dispersed slowly, muttering among themselves. Clara could feel their uncertainty, their confusion about what kind of man Rowan Mercer would turn out to be compared to his father. Inside the house, Beth had breakfast waiting. Clara and Rowan ate in exhausted silence, while Sam filled Beth in on what had happened. August is probably rolling in his grave, Beth said finally. Good, Rowan replied. Let him roll. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a kind of fierce pride she hadn't expected. This man who'd chosen her because she could survive was turning out to be someone who could do more than just survive. He could change things. They might actually make it through this. The thought had barely formed when one of the younger hands burst through the door, his face white. Mr. Mercer, he gasped. There's someone here from the territorial governor's office. He says there's been a formal complaint filed about water rights violations going back 20 years. Says he needs to see all your land deeds and water contracts immediately. Clara and Rowan looked at each other. How long ago was the complaint filed? Clara asked. 3 days ago, the hand said, before the cattle theft. Elias had started the legal battle before they'd even talked to him. He'd planned for both contingencies, violence and law, which meant their settlement might have stopped one attack, but the other was already in motion. Rowan stood up. Where is this man? Waiting in the office. They walked together down the hallway, Clara's mind racing through their options. The territorial investigator was a thin man in his 50s with a briefcase and the kind of officious expression that suggested he enjoyed finding violations. Mr. Mercer, he said without preamble. I'm William Sachs, Territorial Land Compliance. I'm here regarding multiple complaints of water rights violations, illegal land acquisitions, and fraud related to property transfers occurring between 1853 and 1867. Complaints filed by whom? Rowan asked. That information is confidential. Sachs pulled papers from his briefcase. I'll need to see all relevant deeds, contracts, and water rights documentation. You have 48 hours to produce them or face immediate seizure of disputed properties. Clara's blood ran cold. 48 hours. They couldn't possibly organize and defend all of August's deals in 48 hours, and Sachs knew it. This was the real attack. The cattle theft had just been the opening move. Clara looked at the territorial investigator with his smug expression and his 48-hour ultimatum and felt something cold and calculating settle into place in her mind. This was what August had trained her for, not the clean parts, the ugly parts. Mr. Sachs, she said, her voice perfectly pleasant. I assume you've been traveling. Would you like some coffee before we begin? Sachs blinked, clearly thrown by her courtesy. Yes, that would be acceptable. Wonderful. Beth, Clara called toward the kitchen, could you bring coffee for Mr. Sachs and set him up in the front parlor? He'll be more comfortable there while my husband and I gather the requested documents. She turned to Rowan and spoke quietly. Go get every land deed and water contract from the filing cabinets. All of them. Don't organize them, don't sort them. Just pile them up. I need volume, not order. Rowan's eyes narrowed slightly, understanding flickering across his face. How much volume? All of it. 30 years worth. Every scrap of paper with August's signature. While Beth settled Sachs in the parlor with coffee and small talk about the weather, Clara and Rowan hauled armloads of documents from the office filing cabinets. Not just the land deeds, everything. Purchase orders, cattle records, worker contracts, correspondence with other ranchers, bills of sale for equipment. Clara grabbed August's personal ledgers, his old calendars, even a stack of receipts from the general store. They dumped it all on the massive dining table in a pile that must have been 3 feet high. There, Clara said, loud enough for Sachs to hear from the parlor. All the documentation you requested, Mr. Sachs. Please, come review it at your leisure. Sachs appeared in the doorway, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. He stared at the mountain of paper. This is, he started, every document related to land, water rights, and property transfers from 1853 to present day. Clara said smoothly, You said 48 hours. The clock starts now. She glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. That would be 8:15 on Saturday morning when your deadline expires. Will you be working here taking the documents back to the territorial office? I can't possibly review all of this and then I suppose you'll need to extend your deadline. Clara's voice was sweet as honey. Or perhaps you'd prefer to be more specific about which properties you're investigating. If you narrow the scope, we can certainly pull the relevant paperwork more efficiently. Sachs set down his coffee cup with a sharp click. Mrs. Mercer, I'm aware of what you're attempting here. I'm attempting to comply with your request, Mr. Sachs. You asked for documentation. Here it is. You're burying me in irrelevant material to run out the clock. I'm providing comprehensive records because you weren't specific about what you needed. Clara tilted her head slightly. Unless, of course, you'd like to tell us exactly which complaints you're investigating and which properties are in question, that would certainly make this process more efficient for everyone. Sachs's face reddened. The complaint had been filed confidentially, which meant he wasn't supposed to reveal the specific allegations or the complainant. But without that information, he had to wade through 3 feet of unsorted documents to find what he was looking for. Clara had just turned his 48-hour ambush into an impossible task. I'll need workspace, Sachs said stiffly, and assistance from someone familiar with your filing system. Of course. Beth will set you up in the library. As for assistance, Clara glanced at Rowan. My husband and I have ranch business to attend to, but I'm sure we can spare someone to answer questions if you get lost. Tommy, Rowan said, catching on. Get Tommy in here. Tommy was the 17-year-old hand who'd found the burned message on the fence. Sweet kid, hard worker, but couldn't organize his way out of a paper bag. He appeared a few minutes later, nervous and confused about why he was being pulled inside. Tommy, this is Mr. Sachs from the territorial office, Clara explained. He needs to review some documents and might have questions about our filing system. Can you stay nearby in case he needs help? Tommy nodded earnestly. Yes, ma'am. Though I gotta tell you, Mr. Mercer, the old Mr. Mercer, he didn't really have a system. He just kind of put things wherever. Sachs looked like he wanted to strangle someone. Claire and Rowan left him there, drowning in paper, and walked back to the office. As soon as the door closed, Rowan started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. That was, you just buried a territorial investigator in 30 years of random paperwork. I bought us time, Clara corrected, but not much. Maybe a week, if we're lucky. We need to use it. To do what? To get ahead of the complaint. Clara sat down at the desk. Sachs is following the law, which means someone filed specific allegations. We need to know what those allegations are and who else is involved. Elias. Maybe. Probably. But he might not be working alone. Clara pulled out fresh paper. Start listing every rancher or landowner your father had disputes with. Anyone who might have joined forces with Elias to take you down. They worked through the morning building a list of August's enemies. It was depressingly long. Morrison Ranch. The water dispute Clara had resolved. The Patterson family. August had foreclosed on their property in 1861. William Barnes. Boundary dispute that went to court in 1865. The list went on. By noon, they had 17 names. We can't fight them all, Rowan said, staring at the list. We don't need to fight them. We need to split them. Claire's mind was working through the strategy August had been teaching her. Some of these people have legitimate grievances. Others are just opportunistic, jumping on the bandwagon because they see weakness. We need to identify which is which and deal with them separately. How? We start with Morrison. Clara stood up. The water rights we gave back. That was a real gesture. If we can get him to publicly state that we're trying to make things right, it undermines the narrative that we're just like August. You want character witnesses. I want to change the story. Clara grabbed her coat. Right now, the story is that the Mercer Ranch is built on crimes and should be torn apart. We need to make it about a son trying to fix his father's mistakes and deserving a chance to do it. They rode to the Morrison Ranch that afternoon. Clara insisted on going personally rather than sending a letter, and she insisted on going without an armed escort. Just her and Rowan making themselves vulnerable. Morrison was a man in his 60s with weather-worn skin and suspicious eyes. He met them on his porch with his arms crossed. Heard about your trouble with the territorial office, he said without preamble. News travels fast, Rowan replied. Always does when a Mercer is involved. Morrison's tone wasn't friendly. What do you want? Clara decided on bluntness. We want to know if you're part of the complaint against us. Morrison's eyebrows rose. And if I am, then we'd like to know what we can do to resolve your grievances before this turns into a war that hurts everyone in the territory. That's a different tune than your father would have sung. August Mercer is dead, Rowan said, and I'm not him. Morrison studied them both. You gave me my water back because it was the right thing to do, or because you were scared of a fight. Both, Claire admitted. We were scared of a fight we didn't need to have. Your loan was paid. Keeping your water was just punishment for its own sake. There was no point. Morrison's expression shifted slightly. You know why I hated your father? He asked Rowan. Not because he took my water, because he enjoyed it. He liked having power over people, liked watching them squirm. I know, Rowan said quietly. You like that too? No. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm not part of the complaint. Elias Granger approached me about joining, but I told him no. Said I wanted to see what kind of man you'd be before I made any moves. Clara felt some of the tension release from her shoulders. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There's at least 6 others he recruited. They've got legitimate claims, and they've got paper to back them up. Morrison leaned against his porch railing. But I'll tell you something. If you handle this right, if you actually make restitution to the families your father wronged, some of those 6 might back off. They want justice, not destruction. And the ones who want destruction, Rowan asked, those you're going to have to fight. They got the names from Morrison, 6 ranchers who'd signed on to Elias's complaint. 3 of them Clara recognized from the list she and Rowan had made. The other 3 were surprises, families she'd thought were neutral. We need to split them, she told Rowan as they rode back. Morrison said some want justice. If we can give them that, we reduce the coalition against us. With what money? We're already paying Elias $30,000, and Sachs might seize properties before we can liquidate anything. Clara's mind was racing. The cattle. The stolen cattle. Did Elias say where they are? No. Why? Because if they're just penned up somewhere, we could get them back as part of the settlement. That's $80,000 in assets that could be converted to cash. Clara was thinking out loud now. And the land we're giving him, the 300 acres, what if we mortgaged some of our other holdings to cover immediate settlements with the other families? We'd be leveraging everything. One bad year and we'd lose it all. One legal battle and we'd lose it all anyway. At least this way we control the outcome. They returned to find Sachs still in the library, surrounded by papers, looking thoroughly miserable. Tommy sat in the corner, earnestly explaining that he was pretty sure some of the water rights documents were filed under W, but maybe also under contracts, or possibly just miscellaneous. Clara allowed herself a small smile. That evening, she and Rowan sat down with the ranch's financial records and started calculating. If they sold off some of the smaller outlying parcels, mortgaged the eastern grazing land, and recovered the stolen cattle, they could scrape together maybe $60,000. Split among 6 ranchers with legitimate claims, that was $10,000 each. It wouldn't make anyone whole, but it might be enough to satisfy the ones who wanted justice rather than revenge. The next morning, Clara drafted letters to all 6 ranchers named in Morrison's list. The letters were identical. We acknowledge that August Mercer wronged your family through illegal or unethical means. We cannot undo the past, but we can offer restitution. If you are willing to meet with us to discuss a fair settlement, we will come to you in good faith with a serious offer. Our goal is justice and reconciliation, not continued conflict. Sincerely, Rowan and Clara Mercer. She signed each one personally, then gave them to Sam to deliver. You think they'll respond? Rowan asked. Some will, some won't, but we have to try. 3 days later, the responses started coming back. 2 of the 6 agreed to meet. 2 refused outright, saying they wouldn't negotiate with thieves. The other 2 didn't respond at all. 2 out of 6, Rowan said, staring at the replies. That's not enough. It's a start. Clara was already planning the meetings. If we can settle with 2, and Morrison speaks for us publicly, that's 3 families who can testify that we're trying to make things right. It changes the narrative. The first meeting was with the Patterson family. Their patriarch had died, but his daughter Sarah ran the homestead now, barely 40 acres that August had stolen through a fraudulent debt claim. Sarah Patterson was a hard woman in her 50s with eyes that could cut glass. She sat across from Clara and Rowan in her sparse kitchen and said, "You want to pay me off, so I'll drop my complaint. We want to return what was stolen from your father," Clara corrected. "Whether you drop the complaint is up to you." "My father died broken because of August Mercer. You think $10,000 fixes that?" "No," Clara said. "Nothing fixes that. But holding on to revenge doesn't bring him back. It just keeps you locked in the past." Easy for you to say from your big house on stolen land. You're right. It is easy for me to say. Clara didn't flinch. But the question isn't what's easy, it's what's possible. We can't give you back your father. We can't undo 30 years. But we can give you enough money to expand your homestead, buy more cattle, build something sustainable. Or we can all spend the next 5 years in legal battles that bankrupt everyone and help nobody. Sarah's jaw was tight. "Why should I trust you?" "Because we're sitting in your kitchen," Rowan said quietly. "We came here alone, unarmed, asking you to let us make this right. If we were like my father, we'd be threatening you right now. Or worse." Sarah looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Show me the offer in writing." They spent the next 2 hours hammering out details. In the end, Sarah agreed to accept $10,000 plus a formal written apology and the return of the original property deed her father had signed before August manipulated it. She didn't drop the complaint immediately, but she agreed to withhold it pending the completion of the settlement terms. It wasn't friendship, but it was progress. The second meeting was with William Barnes, the boundary dispute from 1865. Barnes was older, angrier, and less willing to negotiate. He wanted $20,000 and he wanted Rowan to publicly admit that August had been a criminal. "I can't do that," Rowan said, "not in those words." "Then we have nothing to discuss." Clara interrupted before the meeting could collapse. "What if we acknowledged that the boundary dispute was resolved illegally? that the survey was manipulated and the ruling was influenced by August's connections. That's a statement of fact, not a character judgment. Barnes considered this. And the money? 15,000, Clara offered. That's the absolute maximum we can do, but it has to include an agreement that this settles all claims related to that boundary dispute permanently. 15,000 and a public statement that the dispute was resolved illegally. Clara looked at Rowan. He nodded slowly. Deal, Clara said. Barnes still looked angry, but he shook their hands. 2 settlements, 2 families who would now testify that the Mercers were attempting restitution. Combined with Morrison's endorsement, that was 3 voices against the narrative of continued Mercer corruption. But 4 ranchers still held out, including 2 who wanted nothing less than the complete destruction of the Mercer ranch. Clara was working through strategies for approaching the holdouts when Sam came into the office looking grim. Mrs. Mercer, you need to come outside. She followed him to the front of the house where a crowd had gathered. 20 men on horseback, all of them armed. At the front was a man Clara recognized from town, Marcus Webb, who owned a middling ranch about 30 miles west. Rowan was already out there, standing on the porch steps. His rifle was leaning against the railing, visible but not in his hands. Webb, he called out. What's this about? This is about justice, Webb shouted back. We're here to tell you that we're done with Mercer crimes, done with Mercer intimidation, done with watching you buy your way out of consequences. I'm not buying my way out of anything. I'm trying to make restitution to families my father wronged. Restitution, Webb spat. You're trying to silence people with money. Well, some of us won't be silenced. Some of us want the law to do its job and tear your empire apart piece by piece. Clara stepped out onto the porch beside Rowan. Then let it, she said, her voice carrying across the yard. Let the law investigate. Let the truth come out. We're not hiding from it. Easy to say when you're already bribing your way out of the worst charges. We're settling legitimate claims with families who are willing to negotiate. That's not bribery. That's accountability. Clara descended the steps, walking toward the crowd despite Sam's hissed warning behind her. Mr. Webb, if your ranch was built on crimes and you wanted to fix them, what would you do? My ranch wasn't built on crimes. Wasn't it? I seem to recall your father had some interesting disputes with his neighbors back in the 50s. Should we dig into those? Webb's face went red. That's completely different, is it? Or is the real difference that you see a chance to take down a bigger target and you're using moral outrage as cover? Clara stopped 10 feet from the front line of horses. Here's the truth. August Mercer was a bastard who did terrible things. We're not denying that. We're trying to fix what he broke. If you want to help us fix it, come inside and we'll talk. If you want to destroy us for the sake of destroying us, then be honest about it and stop pretending this is about justice. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Claire could feel Rowan and Sam both coiled to move if anyone reached for a weapon. Then one of the men in the back, younger, maybe 25, spoke up. She's got a point, Marcus. My pa said August Mercer was a bastard, but he also said the son's been trying to do right. Maybe we ought to give him a chance. Shut up, James, Webb snapped. No, I won't shut up. James urged his horse forward. My family's got no quarrel with the Mercers now that they settled the water dispute with Morrison. We're here because you said they were still acting like August, but they're not. They're sitting down and negotiating like reasonable people. They're buying silence. They're doing what any of us would do if we inherited a mess and tried to clean it up. James looked at Clara. Mrs. Mercer, I'm sorry we came here like this. It wasn't right. He wheeled his horse and rode off. 3 other men followed him. Webb was left with 16 supporters instead of 20, and the fracture was visible in the uncertain looks they were giving each other. This isn't over, Webb said to Rowan. You're going down, Mercer, you and your scheming wife. If we're going down, at least it'll be for something we actually did, not just for bearing my father's name, Rowan replied evenly. You know where the door is, Webb. Use it. The mob dispersed slowly, tension leaking out like air from a balloon. When they were finally gone, Sam let out a breath. That was close. Too close, Rowan agreed. He turned to Clara. What you did, walking toward armed men like that, don't ever do it again. It worked, didn't it? It worked because Webb's a coward who won't actually pull a trigger. If that had been someone else, Rowan shook his head. You're not invincible, Clara. I know, but sometimes you have to gamble. She looked at the empty yard. 4 men broke away. That's 4 families who might be convinced to stay neutral instead of actively working against us. Back inside, they found Sachs waiting in the office. He'd been there for 5 days now, wading through documents, and he looked exhausted. "I need to extend the deadline," he said without preamble. "Your filing system is a disaster, and your documents are incomplete in several key areas." "How much time do you need?" Clara asked. "Another week. Maybe 2. "Take 3. Clara gestured at the mountain of paper. "We want to be thorough, after all." After Sachs left to send a telegram to his superiors, Rowan turned to Clara. "You're stalling." "I'm surviving. Every day we keep him buried in paperwork is another day we have to settle with more families and build support." Clara pulled out her list again. "We've got 2 settlements done, 4 ranchers left in the coalition against us. If we can flip one more to our side, we start to look less like criminals and more like people trying to make amends. And if we can't?" Clara didn't answer that. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked like they were trying to outrun a wildfire. Clara rode to 3 more ranches offering settlements and apologies. One accepted. The widow of a man August had crushed in business. She took $8,000 and a written acknowledgement of wrongdoing with tears in her eyes, saying it was the first time anyone had admitted her husband hadn't been weak. He'd been cheated. The other 2 told her to get off their property. Meanwhile, Rowan worked to keep the ranch running despite the investigation, despite the uncertainty, despite workers starting to question whether they'd have jobs in a month. Several hands quit, afraid of being associated with a ranch that might go under. Others stayed out of loyalty or stubbornness or because they had nowhere else to go. Garrett remained, though he made his disapproval of their methods clear every day. "August would have fought," he said one night at dinner. "Not negotiated." "August would have started a war," Rowan replied, "and we'd all be dead or in prison by now. Or we'd have won." Winning through violence isn't winning, it's just survival until the next fight. Garrett shook his head but didn't argue further. The break came from an unexpected source. Morrison, the rancher whose water rights they'd returned, published a letter in the territorial newspaper. Clara didn't know he was going to do it until Sam brought her a copy of the paper 3 days after it ran. The letter was titled "Justice versus Revenge, a Rancher's Perspective on the Mercer Situation." Morrison wrote about August's crimes. He didn't minimize them. But he also wrote about Rowan and Clara's attempts at restitution, about the water rights they'd returned without being forced, about the settlements they were negotiating in good faith. He ended with a paragraph that Clara read 3 times. "We can choose to punish the son for the father's sins, or we can choose to let a good man try to fix what his father broke. I've seen Rowan Mercer these past months, and I've seen his wife Clara standing beside him. They are not August Mercer. They deserve the chance to prove it, and this territory needs to decide whether it values justice or just vengeance." 2 days after the letter published, one of the holdout ranchers contacted them about settlement negotiations. 3 days after that, Sachs finally finished his review of the documents. He called Clara and Rowan into the library, where he'd been working, and gestured at the organized stacks he'd created. "I've identified 17 violations of territorial law in your land acquisition history," he said. "Water rights manipulations, fraudulent debt claims, survey irregularities, and what appears to be outright forgery in at least 3 cases. Clara's stomach dropped. And under normal circumstances, I would recommend immediate seizure of all disputed properties pending criminal investigation. Sachs paused. However, Rowan repeated. However, I've also received documentation of 4 completed settlements with affected families, plus signed affidavits from those families stating they consider the matters resolved. I've received letters from 3 additional ranchers vouching for your good faith efforts. And I've read Morrison's editorial, which has apparently been circulated widely. Sachs organized his papers into a neat stack. The territory has limited resources for prosecution. If we pursue this case, it'll take years and cost more than the state budget can handle. Meanwhile, you're actively resolving the disputes through negotiation. What are you saying? Clara asked carefully. I'm saying that I'm going to recommend to the governor that we allow the settlement process to continue under territorial supervision. You'll have 6 months to resolve all outstanding claims. Any family that refuses your settlement offers can still pursue legal action, but the territory won't be actively prosecuting unless new evidence of ongoing criminal activity emerges. Sachs looked at them both. Essentially, you're being given a chance to fix this yourselves. Don't waste it. After he left, Clara and Rowan sat in the library in stunned silence. We won, Rowan said finally. Didn't we? We didn't lose, Clara corrected. There's a difference. 6 months to settle with everyone. Can we do it? Clara pulled out her list. 4 ranchers had accepted settlements. 2 had refused but weren't actively pursuing legal action anymore after Morrison's editorial. That left 8 families with potential claims who hadn't been contacted yet, plus the 4 who were still hostile. I don't know, she admitted, but we're going to try. The next 4 months were a blur of negotiations. Clara and Rowan rode to ranch after ranch, offering money they didn't have, apologizing for crimes they hadn't committed, slowly building a reputation as people who were at least trying to clean up August's mess. Some families accepted, some refused. Some wanted to think about it. The hostile 4 remained hostile, led by Marcus Webb, who seemed to take personal offense at their continued existence. He published his own editorial calling Morrison a Mercer sympathizer and claiming Clara was manipulating public opinion with false humility. Clara ignored him. She had bigger problems. The money was running out faster than she'd anticipated. Between settlements, legal fees, and the operational costs of keeping the ranch running, they were bleeding cash. Clara had to mortgage more land, sell off equipment, even let go of a few more workers they couldn't afford to keep. Beth warned her one night that they were dangerously close to being unable to make payroll. How close? Clara asked. 2 months. Maybe 3 if we cut everything to the bone. Clara sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. They'd come so far. Settled with 7 families. Changed the public narrative from corrupt empire that should be destroyed to troubled legacy being carefully repaired. But if they ran out of money before finishing the settlements, it would all collapse anyway. Rowan found her there an hour later, staring at the ledgers by lamplight. We're out of money, she said without preamble. I know. I don't know how to fix this. Rowan sat down beside her. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if we sold the ranch? Clara's head snapped up. What? Not all of it, but the main house, the core property. We could pay off all the settlements, clear the debts, and keep enough land to run a smaller operation. Rowan's voice was calm, like he'd been thinking about this for a while. We'd lose the empire, but we'd keep our integrity. Your father built this place for you. My father built this place through crimes. Maybe it's time to let it go. Rowan took her hand. I'd rather have a small, clean ranch than a big one covered in blood. Clara thought about the empire she'd been trying to save, about August's dying words, about the weight of legacy and inheritance, about her own desperate need to prove she could survive anything. If we sell, she said slowly, Webb and the others win. They get to say we couldn't handle the pressure. Let them say it. I don't care anymore. Rowan's grip tightened. I care about you, about us, about building something we can be proud of, even if it's smaller than what my father had. Clara looked at their joined hands, both scarred from work, both stronger than they'd been 6 months ago. Let me try one more thing first, she said. The next morning, she rode to Elias Granger's ranch alone. He met her on his porch, surprised. Mrs. Mercer, I thought we'd settled everything. We did. This is about something else. Clara dismounted. I need your help. Elias's eyebrows rose. My help. You filed that territorial complaint because you wanted justice for your father, and you got it, or at least you got recognition and restitution. Clara walked closer. But there are 12 other families out there with similar claims against the Mercer Ranch. Some I've settled with. Some are still hostile, and I'm running out of money to finish the job. And you want me to, what, give you money? No, I want you to speak for me. Clara pulled Morrison's editorial from her pocket. This changed everything. When a man your father's enemy wronged spoke up and said we were trying to do right, people listened. If you did the same, if you told your story and said we'd made fair restitution, the holdouts might actually negotiate instead of just demanding our destruction. Elias stared at her. You want the son of the man your father-in-law destroyed to vouch for you. I want the man we made a fair settlement with to tell the truth about that settlement. Clara held his gaze. Elias, you could destroy us. You still could. If you told the newspapers that our settlement was inadequate, that we're still monsters, people would believe you. But is that what you want? More destruction? Or do you want actual justice for all the families August hurt? Elias was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What would I have to do?" "Write your story. Tell what August did to your father, but also tell what Rowan and I did to make it right. Be honest. Don't make us sound like saints. Just tell the truth." Clara's voice softened. "Give other families hope that negotiation might actually work. And if I do this and it doesn't work, if the holdouts still refuse to settle, then at least we tried something other than violence." Elias smiled slightly. "You sound like you did when you showed up here at 2 in the morning asking for peace. Desperate and hoping for the best? Brave and willing to take risks most people wouldn't." Elias crossed his arms. "I'll do it. I'll write the story. But I'm telling the whole truth, including the parts that make your father-in-law look like the bastard he was. I wouldn't want it any other way." Elias Granger's story ran in the territorial newspaper 2 weeks later. It was brutal and honest. He spared no details about how August had destroyed his father, about the 30 years of poverty and anger that followed, about the cattle theft and the plan for legal revenge. But the ending was different than Clara expected. When Rowan and Clara Mercer rode to my ranch in the middle of the night to negotiate peace, I thought they were fools. When they offered fair restitution, I thought it was a trick. But they weren't fools, and it wasn't a trick. They were two people trying to fix something they didn't break, trying to build something different than what August Mercer built. They succeeded with me. They can succeed with you if you let them. The question is whether we want justice or just endless revenge. The response was immediate. 3 of the holdout families contacted them within the week to discuss settlements. Marcus Webb published another editorial calling Elias a traitor, but his voice was getting drowned out by the growing chorus of people saying the Mercers deserved a chance. By the end of the 6-month deadline Sachs had given them, they'd settled with 11 of the 12 families. The 12th, Webb's own family, who claimed August had stolen mineral rights in 1858, refused to negotiate and filed a lawsuit. "Let him sue," Clara told Rowan. "We can fight 1 lawsuit. We couldn't fight 12. Sachs returned to review their settlement documentation. He spent 2 days going through the contracts, the payment records, the signed affidavits from families confirming they considered matters resolved. "I'll be recommending the investigation be closed," he said finally, "with the exception of the Webb lawsuit, which will proceed through normal legal channels. But as far as the territorial government is concerned, you've fulfilled the requirements." After he left, Clara and Rowan walked out to the porch and looked at the valley that had almost been taken from them. "We're broke," Rowan said. "The ranch is mortgaged to hell. We've got maybe 20 workers left instead of 40. We're running half the cattle we had 6 months ago." "But we're still here," Claire replied. "And we're clean. Or cleaner, anyway. My father would say we lost." "Your father's dead." Clara took Rowan's hand. "And we're not." They stood there in the fading light, 2 people who'd survived something most marriages would never face, and felt the weight of the future settling onto their shoulders. Different from before, but still heavy. Still real. Still theirs. The lawsuit from Marcus Webb dragged on for 8 months. 8 months of depositions and court appearances and legal fees that ate through what little money they'd managed to keep after the settlements. 8 months of Webb's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man from Helena, who seemed to enjoy making Clara repeat the details of August's crimes in front of a courtroom full of strangers, trying to prove that the entire Mercer Ranch should be dissolved and its assets distributed among August's victims. Clara sat through every session with her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, answering every question honestly, even when the truth made her want to crawl out of her own skin. Yes, August Mercer had manipulated mineral rights contracts. Yes, he'd used legal loopholes to steal from the Webb family. Yes, the Mercer fortune was built on crimes. But when Webb's lawyer asked if she thought the ranch should be destroyed because of those crimes, Clara looked directly at the judge and said, "No, I think it should be transformed." The judge was a woman in her 60s named Catherine Albright, who'd been appointed to the territorial bench 3 years earlier and had a reputation for being unmoved by theatrics. She listened to 8 months of testimony without showing much expression, asked pointed questions that made both sides uncomfortable, and finally called for closing arguments on a cold March morning. Webb's lawyer went first, painting a picture of generational corruption that could only be cleansed through complete dissolution. The Mercer Ranch is built on a foundation of crimes, he declared. Every acre, every dollar, every drop of water that flows through that property is tainted by theft and fraud. We cannot allow such an empire to continue simply because the current owners are attempting to buy forgiveness. Then it was the Mercers' lawyer's turn. They'd hired a man named Samuel Chen who'd worked as a territorial prosecutor before going into private practice. He was expensive. They'd had to mortgage another 100 acres to afford him, but he was thorough. Your Honor, Chen began, this case is not about whether August Mercer committed crimes. The evidence is clear that he did. This case is about whether we punish the living for the sins of the dead, and whether we value destruction or redemption. The Mercers have settled with 11 families. They've returned land, paid restitution, and publicly acknowledged wrongdoing. They've transformed their ranch from an empire built on fear to a business built on honest dealing. To destroy them now would not be justice, it would be revenge. Also, Judge Albright took 2 weeks to issue her ruling. When the decision came, Claire and Rowan sat in the courtroom and listened as the judge read from her written opinion. The courtroom was packed. Half the territory seemed to have shown up to watch the Mercers either survive or fall. This court finds that August Mercer did indeed commit fraud in his acquisition of mineral rights from the Webb family in 1858, Albright read, her voice carrying clearly. However, this court also finds that the current owners of the Mercer Ranch, Rowan and Clara Mercer, have made good faith efforts to remedy historical wrongs and have successfully settled with the majority of affected families. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear the next words. While the Webb family is entitled to compensation for the fraud committed against them, this court does not find sufficient cause to dissolve the Mercer Ranch entirely. Instead, the Mercers are ordered to pay restitution to the Webb family in the amount of $12,000 to be paid over 3 years at $4,000 annually. Additionally, the disputed mineral rights are to be returned to the Webb family effective immediately. Webb's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, with respect, that's insufficient. Sit down, counselor. I'm not finished. Albright's tone was sharp. This court is also issuing a formal finding that the Mercer Ranch has completed sufficient restitution efforts to be considered in compliance with territorial law going forward. No further claims based on August Mercer's historical conduct will be entertained by this court unless new evidence of criminal activity emerges. The matter is closed. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. Clara felt Rowan's hand find hers under the table, his grip tight enough to hurt. They'd won. Not completely, $12,000 they didn't have, plus the loss of mineral rights that might have been valuable someday. But they'd survived. The ranch would continue. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Some of them looked disappointed. Clara recognized Webb standing with his arms crossed, his face red with fury. But others, more than Clara had expected, nodded to them as they passed or even said quiet words of congratulation. Morrison was there. He shook Rowan's hand. Good ruling, fair ruling. Thank you, Rowan said, for everything. Your editorial just told the truth. Morrison glanced at Clara. Your wife's got steel in her spine. Don't lose that. I don't plan to. Elias Granger stood at the edge of the crowd, slightly apart from everyone else. When Clara caught his eye, he raised his hand in a small salute. She nodded back. They weren't friends. They'd never be friends. But they'd reached something more valuable than friendship. They'd reached understanding. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Sam had come with them to the courthouse, and he rode slightly behind, giving them space. The spring grass was starting to green up after the long winter, and the air smelled like rain and new growth. $12,000 over 3 years, Rowan said finally. We can manage that. Barely, but we can. If we have good years, Clara added. If the weather holds and the cattle prices stay stable. If. Rowan smiled slightly. Seems like our whole life is ifs now. Better than it being definitely destroyed. When they reached the ranch, Beth was waiting on the porch. The remaining workers had gathered in the yard, maybe 15 of them now, down from the 40 they'd had when August died. Garrett stood at the front, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Well? Beth called out. We won, Rowan said simply. A cheer went up from the workers, not loud, not celebratory exactly, but relieved. These were men and women who'd been living with uncertainty for months, never sure if they'd still have jobs next week. Garrett walked forward. What did we lose? 12,000 over 3 years, and the mineral rights Webb claimed. Garrett grunted. Could have been worse. Could have been everything, Clara replied. Yeah. Garrett looked at Rowan. Your father would have hated this. The compromising, the negotiating, the admitting he was wrong. I know, but you're not him. Garrett extended his hand, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Rowan shook it, and Clara saw something shift in the relationship between them. Not quite friendship, but respect earned through shared struggle. That night, Clara and Rowan sat in the office that had been August's and was now theirs, looking at the ledgers. The numbers were brutal. Between legal fees, settlements, and operational costs, they were running at a loss. The ranch that August had built into an empire was now just a working operation like any other, struggling to make ends meet. We need to diversify, Clara said, thinking out loud. We can't just rely on cattle. What if we added horses? Good breeding stock could bring in steady money. Takes capital to start. Everything takes capital, Clara rubbed her temples. But we're not going to survive if we just keep doing what August did. We need something new. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what if we partnered with some of the families we settled with? Pool resources, share breeding stock, create a cooperative. Clara looked at him. That might work. If Morrison and the Pattersons and maybe Sarah would agree to it, we'd have to give up some control, share decisions. We'd also share risk, and it would prove we're serious about working with people instead of dominating them. Clara felt the idea taking shape. August built an empire alone. What if we built something different together? Over the next year, they did exactly that. It wasn't easy. Some of the families they approached said no. The wounds were still too fresh, the trust too fragile. But Morrison agreed, and Sarah Patterson, and 2 others. They formed what they called the Territorial Ranchers Cooperative, pooling resources for breeding stock, sharing equipment, negotiating as a group with buyers in Helena and beyond. The first year was rough. They barely broke even, but the second year was better. The cooperative model proved more resilient than individual operations. When one ranch had a bad season, the others could help carry them through. When they negotiated together, they got better prices than they could have separately. Clara threw herself into the work, with the same intensity she'd once used to keep the Whitlock Ranch alive. She traveled to other ranches, negotiated deals, built relationships with buyers. She learned that the skills August had taught her, how to read contracts, how to spot lies, how to calculate risk, could be used to build instead of destroy. Rowan worked the land itself, breeding better cattle, improving grazing rotation, treating the workers like partners instead of tools. Slowly, the ranch started attracting good people again, workers who'd heard the Mercers were fair, who wanted to be part of something that felt less like exploitation and more like honest work. Beth remained the steady heart of the household, managing everything from meals to finances to moral support when Clara came home exhausted and discouraged. You're doing fine, she'd say, pouring coffee. Better than fine. You're doing something that matters. We're barely surviving. That's what mattering looks like sometimes. Easy things don't need character. 2 years after the lawsuit ended, Clara was in town purchasing supplies when she saw a familiar figure walking toward her. Margaret, her stepmother from the Whitlock Ranch. She looked older, thinner, her clothes shabby in a way that told Clara everything about how the ranch had fared without her labor keeping it alive. Margaret stopped when she saw Clara, her face going through several expressions before settling on something that might have been shame. Clara, she said. Margaret, Clara kept her voice neutral. I heard you won your court case, that the ranch is still running. It is. Margaret's hands twisted together. The Whitlock place. We're losing it. Your father's drinking got worse after you left. We couldn't keep up with the work. The bank's foreclosing in 3 months. Clara waited. She knew what was coming. I know I have no right to ask, Margaret continued, her voice shaking. But I thought, maybe, if you could help. Help how? Clara's tone was even. Lend you money I don't have? Come back and fix everything like I used to while you treat me like an animal? I know I was cruel to you. Margaret's eyes were wet. I know I was jealous. of how strong you were, of how Thomas still loved your mother even after she died. I took it out on you, and that was wrong." Clara felt the old familiar anger rise in her throat, but it was different now, duller, more like scar tissue than an open wound. "You were cruel," she agreed. "You made me feel worthless for years. You married my father and treated his daughter like a burden he should have gotten rid of." Margaret flinched, but didn't deny it. "But you know what?" Clara continued. "That cruelty made me strong. It taught me I could survive anything. So in a twisted way, I should probably thank you." "Clara, I'm not going to save the Whitlock Ranch," Clara said. "I'm not going to give you money or come fix your problems. That place nearly killed me, and I don't owe it anything." Margaret's face crumpled. "But," Clara added, "I'll hire your husband and Rosalie if they want to work. Legitimate work for fair wages. No special treatment, no charity, just work." Margaret looked up, surprised. "You do that?" "I do that because they're family, even if they treated me like I wasn't, and because destroying people who wronged me would make me just like August Mercer, and I'm done with that." Clara adjusted her packages. "Tell them to come by the ranch if they're interested. And Margaret, I don't forgive you, but I'm done letting you live in my head rent-free." She walked away before Margaret could respond. That evening, she told Rowan about the encounter. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd developed over the past 2 years, 20 minutes at the end of each day to just be still together. "You think they'll come?" Rowan asked. "Thomas might. Rosalie? I don't know. She was raised to think work was beneath her." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "But I meant what I said. I'm done being angry at them. It doesn't serve any purpose except making me tired." "When did you get so wise?" "When I stopped trying to prove I was strong enough to carry everything alone." Clara looked at him. "You taught me that. This whole thing, the settlements, the cooperative, the compromise, I couldn't have done any of it if I'd kept thinking the way I did at the Whitlock Ranch. That survival meant being harder than everyone else." "You're still hard," Rowan said with a slight smile, "but not cruel. There's a difference." Clara took his hand. "August was hard and cruel. He survived by making sure everyone else failed. We're surviving by helping each other succeed. It's slower and messier, but it's better," Rowan finished. "It's better." Thomas did come to the ranch 2 weeks later looking broken and ashamed. Clara put him to work in the stables under Sam's supervision. Nothing that required trust or responsibility, just honest labor. He was sober more often than not, and after a few months, Sam reported that Thomas was actually becoming a decent hand. Rosalie never came. Clara heard through Beth that she'd married a merchant's son from Helena and moved east. Clara felt a brief pang of something that wasn't quite regret, but also wasn't quite relief. And then she let it go. The 3rd year after the lawsuit, Clara woke up one morning and realized she was late. She didn't tell Rowan immediately. She wanted to be sure. But after 2 more weeks of being late and feeling sick in the mornings, she rode to town and saw the doctor, a woman named Helen Carter, who'd moved to the territory from Philadelphia and had no patience for modesty. "You're pregnant," Dr. Carter confirmed after a brief examination. "About 2 months along, I'd say." Clara sat on the examination table trying to process what that meant. A child. Her child. In the middle of all this chaos and uncertainty and barely controlled survival. "Is that good news or bad news?" Dr. Carter asked, watching her face. "I don't know yet," Clara admitted. "Ask me when I've told my husband." She told Rowan that night in their bedroom. He stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through shock and fear and something that looked almost like wonder. "A baby," he said finally. "A baby. Here? Now? When we're still—" He gestured vaguely at everything. "Still figuring it all out?" "Yes." Rowan sat down on the edge of the bed. "I don't know how to be a father." "I don't know how to be a mother." Clara sat beside him. "But we didn't know how to run a ranch or negotiate peace settlements or survive court cases either, and we figured those out. Those things can't cry at 3 a.m. "True." Clara felt a smile tugging at her mouth despite everything. "We're going to be terrible at this." "Absolutely terrible," Rowan agreed. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her like she was something precious, something he was afraid of breaking. "But we'll be terrible together." The pregnancy was hard. Clara kept working because the ranch couldn't afford for her to stop, and because sitting still made her feel useless. She negotiated contracts with a swelling belly, rode out to check fences until the doctor told her to stop, attended cooperative meetings where she was the only woman and the only one growing a human being inside her body while debating cattle prices. Beth fussed over her constantly. Rowan hovered like she might shatter. The workers started treating her like she was made of glass, which drove Clara insane until Sam finally told them to knock it off. "Mrs. Mercer's been tougher than all of you since before she showed up here," he said. "Baby doesn't change that." In her 7th month, Clara was going through August's locked cabinet one last time, making sure all the documents had been properly filed or destroyed when she found a letter she hadn't seen before. It was addressed to Rowan, sealed with wax, with instructions written on the outside in August's handwriting. "To be opened only after my death and after the dust settles." Clara carried it to Rowan in the barn, where he was working on a mare with a bad hoof. "What's this?" he asked, wiping his hands. "Letter from your father. Found it in the cabinet." Clara handed it to him. "I think he meant for you to read it after we'd survived whatever was coming." Rowan stared at the sealed envelope. "You didn't open it? It's addressed to you. Everything in that cabinet was supposed to be yours to manage. Not this." Clara touched his arm. "This is between you and him. I'll be in the house when you're ready to talk about it." She left him there with the letter. An hour later, Rowan came into the kitchen where Clara was helping Beth with dinner prep, or trying to help while Beth shooed her away from anything that required bending over. He had the letter in his hand, opened, and his eyes were red. "He apologized," Rowan said. His voice was rough. "He actually apologized for building an empire on crimes, for making me inherit his sins, for being the kind of father who taught me how to survive but not how to live." Rowan sat down at the table. "He said he chose you because he knew you'd be strong enough to guide me through the mess he left behind. That he saw in you what he'd lost in himself, the ability to be hard without being cruel." Clara sat down beside him, her hand going to her swollen belly where the baby was moving. "He said he didn't expect forgiveness," Rowan continued, "but he hoped that someday I'd understand he did the only thing he knew how to do, and that by trying to do better, I'd already proved I was a stronger man than he ever was." They sat in silence for a while. Then Clara said, "Do you forgive him?" "I don't know, maybe. Maybe that's not the point." Rowan folded the letter carefully. "He was terrible, and he was my father, and both those things are true. I don't have to choose between them." "No," Clara agreed. "You don't. The baby came in late August during a thunderstorm that shook the house and made the horses nervous in their stalls. Dr. Carter arrived just in time, setting up in the bedroom with Beth's help, while Rowan paced downstairs like a caged animal. The labor was long and painful, and Clara spent several hours being absolutely sure she was going to die. But finally, as dawn broke and the storm cleared, she heard the sound she'd been waiting for, a baby's cry, angry and loud and perfectly alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Carter said, placing the tiny red-faced creature on Clara's chest. "Healthy lungs, good color, she's perfect." Clara looked down at her daughter, at the small fists and the eyes that were trying to focus, and the expression that seemed to say she was thoroughly unimpressed with being born, and felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't known was locked. "Sarah," she heard herself say, "after my mother." Rowan came in then, moving carefully like he was afraid of disturbing something sacred. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his daughter with an expression of pure wonder. "She's tiny," he said. "She's loud," Clara corrected as Sarah began to cry again. "Takes after both of us." "Did you just make a joke while you're actively bleeding and exhausted?" "Survival mechanism." Rowan laughed, then started crying, then laughed again. He kissed Clara's forehead and touched Sarah's impossibly small hand with one finger. "We made a person." "We did." "I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither do I." Clara looked at her daughter, at her husband, at the life they'd built from the wreckage of August's empire. "But we'll figure it out." The first year with Sarah was chaos. She cried at odd hours, needed constant feeding, and seemed to have inherited her mother's stubborn refusal to sleep when anyone expected her to. Clara and Rowan stumbled through it like they stumbled through everything else, exhausted, uncertain, making mistakes and fixing them as best they could. The ranch struggled that year. Between Clara being unable to work at full capacity and an early drought that hurt the grazing, They barely broke even. But the cooperative held, the other ranchers picking up slack the way the Mercers had helped them in previous hard years. Morrison brought food one day, just left it on the porch with a note. For the new mother, don't argue. Sarah Patterson sent a baby blanket she'd knitted herself. Even Garrett, stern, disapproving Garrett, carved a wooden horse for Sarah and left it outside their bedroom door without saying a word. By Sarah's first birthday, Clara had managed to return to work nearly full-time, though she now kept the baby with her more often than not, strapped to her back while she did paperwork or rode out to check on cattle. It was harder than working alone had been, but it was also strangely grounding. Every time she looked at her daughter, she remembered why she was fighting so hard to make the ranch work. The fourth year after the lawsuit, the cooperative finally turned a real profit. Not huge. They weren't going to be empire rich like August had been, but sustainable, solid. The kind of profit that meant workers got paid on time, equipment got replaced when it broke, and Clara and Rowan could start to think about the future without constant fear. They paid off the Webb settlement early with the extra money. Marcus Webb took the payment with ill grace, but he took it. And when Clara heard through Morrison that Webb had admitted to someone at the saloon that maybe the Mercers aren't as bad as the old man was, she counted it as a victory. Small victories. That's what their life was now. Not the sweeping dominance of August's empire, but small, steady victories built on honest work and maintained relationships. Clara was in town with Sarah one afternoon when she ran into the newspaper editor, Morrison, no relation to the rancher. He tipped his hat to her. Mrs. Mercer. How's the little one? Growing like a weed and twice as stubborn. Clara adjusted Sarah on her hip. How's business? Good. Actually, I've been wanting to ask you something. Morrison pulled out a notebook. I'm writing a piece about territorial development, about how ranches are adapting to the new legal environment. I'd like to feature the cooperative as an example of how things are changing. Would you be willing to talk? Clara thought about August, who'd hated publicity unless he could control it, about the fear she used to have of anyone looking too closely at the Mercer ranch. Yes, she said, I'll talk, but I'm telling the whole truth, the ugly parts too. Wouldn't want it any other way. The article ran 3 weeks later. Morrison had interviewed not just Clara and Rowan, but also the other cooperative members, workers from various ranches, even Judge Albright. The piece was titled, From Empire to Community, How One Ranch Chose Reform Over Revenge. It was honest about August's crimes. It didn't minimize the damage he'd done, but it also told the story of what came after. The settlements, the negotiations, the slow building of trust, the creation of something new from something broken. The final paragraph made Clara's throat tight when she read it. The Mercer Ranch will never be the empire August Mercer built. It's smaller now, less dominant, more dependent on cooperation than control. But it's also something August's empire never was, sustainable, ethical, and part of a community rather than ruling over it. Clara and Rowan Mercer have proven that the sins of the father do not have to define the son, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit your foundation was cracked and build something new. They framed the article and hung it in the office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what they'd survived and what they'd chosen to become. 5 years after August died, Clara stood on the porch watching Rowan teach 3-year-old Sarah how to sit on a horse. The girl was fearless, laughing as the gentle mare walked in slow circles, Rowan's hand steady on her back. Beth came out with coffee. You look thoughtful, just thinking about how different things are now. Clara accepted the cup. 5 years ago, we were fighting for survival every single day. Now we're still fighting, Beth interrupted. Just fighting different battles, drought battles, price battles, the never-ending battle of keeping a toddler from trying to climb everything. Clara laughed. True. But you're happy, Beth said. It wasn't a question. Clara considered this. Happy wasn't the word she would have chosen 5 years ago when she was angry and desperate and willing to marry a stranger just to escape. Happy seemed too simple for what she felt now, which was complicated and hard-earned and real. I'm satisfied, she said finally, with what we've built, with who we've become, with the choice to fix things instead of just letting them fall apart. That's better than happy, Beth said. Happy's a feeling. What you're describing is peace. That night, after Sarah was asleep and the ranch was quiet, Clara pulled out August's final letter and read it again. She'd read it maybe a dozen times over the years, trying to understand the man who'd built an empire on crimes and then chosen her, the forgotten daughter nobody wanted, to help tear that empire down and rebuild it into something better. One line in particular always stuck with her. The hardest thing I ever did was admit I'd built something that needed to break before it could be fixed. I hope you're harder than me, boy. Hard enough to do what I couldn't build without destroying. Clara folded the letter and put it back in the desk drawer. Then she walked out onto the porch, where Rowan was sitting, looking at the valley that was theirs now. Not through dominance or theft, but through work and compromise and slowly rebuilt trust. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Sarah, whether we're doing this right, whether she'll look back in 30 years and see our mistakes as clearly as I see my father's." "She will," Clara said, "because we're human and we make mistakes. But the difference is we're trying. We're trying to do better, trying to fix what's broken, trying to build something she can actually be proud of." "You think that's enough?" "I think it's everything." Clara took his hand. The scars on her palms had faded over the years, softened by work that didn't tear her apart. "Your father built an empire alone. We built something better together. And we're teaching Sarah to build even better than we did. That's how you break cycles, not by being perfect, but by being a little bit better each time." Rowan was quiet for a moment, then he said, "You know what August told me once? He said the weak survive by being harmless, and the strong survive by being ruthless." "He was wrong," Clara said. "The weak survive by being underestimated, and the strong survive by knowing when to bend before they break." Is that wisdom or just exhaustion talking? Both. Definitely both. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the valley. Somewhere in the house, Sarah made a small noise in her sleep and then settled again. In the bunkhouses, workers who chose to stay with them were finishing their evening routines. In the eastern pasture, cattle grazed peacefully on land that was shared through cooperative agreement rather than stolen through force. It wasn't the empire August had envisioned. It was smaller, more complicated, dependent on relationships that had to be maintained rather than submission that could be demanded. But it was theirs, really theirs, built on truth instead of lies, on cooperation instead of domination, on the slow, hard work of earning trust rather than the quick, brutal theft of taking it. Clara thought about the invisible daughter she'd been at the Whitlock Ranch, about the girl who'd bled into fence posts nobody thanked her for, about the woman who'd been chosen not because she was pretty or perfect, but because she was strong enough to survive anything. She thought about how that strength, that hard, scarred, unbreakable strength, had been exactly what was needed not to build another empire, but to tear one down and transform it into something that actually deserved to exist. "I was never the daughter anyone wanted," Clara said softly. "I was the daughter who kept everyone alive while they pretended I didn't matter. And I spent so many years thinking that meant something was wrong with me, that I wasn't enough." Rowan's hand tightened on hers. "But August saw something different," Clara continued. "He saw that being the daughter nobody wanted made me free. Free from needing approval. Free from being afraid of losing something I never had. Free to do what was right instead of what was comfortable." "You're more than what my father saw in you," Rowan said. "I know. I'm more than what anyone saw in me, including myself." Clara looked at him in the darkness. "That's what I want Sarah to understand, that being underestimated, being dismissed, being the one nobody thinks matters, it doesn't make you less. Sometimes it makes you exactly what the world needs. A revolutionary disguised as an invisible daughter. Something like that," Clara smiled. Or maybe just someone who was tired enough of being invisible that when she finally got a chance to be seen, she decided to be worth seeing. They stayed on that porch until the moon was high and the night was deep. Two people who'd survived empire and war and their own worst impulses, holding hands in the darkness and remembering every ugly truth they'd had to face to get here. In the morning, there would be work. There was always work. Cattle to manage, contracts to negotiate, relationships to maintain, a daughter to raise, a ranch to keep running through drought and debt, and the 1,000 small crises that made up daily life. But for tonight, Clara allowed herself to feel what Beth had called peace. The complicated, hard-earned, deeply satisfying peace of knowing she'd taken something built on violence and theft and transformed it, inch by stubborn inch, into something that might actually last. Not because she was perfect, not because she'd erased August's crimes or made everyone forget what the Mercer name had once meant, but because she'd done something August never could. She'd admitted the foundation was rotten, torn it down to bare earth, and built something new with her own scarred hands. The invisible daughter nobody wanted had become the woman who changed everything, not through dominance or force, but through the revolutionary act of choosing honesty over power, cooperation over control, and transformation over revenge. And in the end, that was the only empire worth building, the kind that could survive not just drought and debt, but truth, the kind that could be passed down without shame, the kind that proved strength wasn't about who you could crush, but about who you could lift up while still standing yourself. Clara Mercer, once Clara Whitlock, formerly the forgotten daughter of a dying ranch, sat on her porch and watched the stars wheel overhead and felt something she hadn't felt in all her 28 years, certain that the life she was living was the one she was meant to fight for. Not perfect, not easy, not even safe, but hers. Completely, undeniably, irreversibly hers. And that was everything.